The assassin was already inside the walls when the first bell of the summit rang, and by the time its echo died in the glass corridors, he had killed 2 of the Talon guard without either of them making a sound. Vess of the Quiet Count did not hurry. Hurrying was for killers who had not planned. He moved along the underside of the Sun Gallery where the light came through the floor instead of the ceiling, a river of white noon pouring up through the Ceridian spire's transparent stone, and he let the brightness swallow the seam of his carapace so that anyone glancing up would see only a shimmer, a trick of the cloud sea below. He had studied this palace for 40 days. He knew which of its floating tiers turned to follow the sun and which stayed fixed. He knew the rotation of the guard, the pitch of the alarm reeds, the exact weight a pressure tile would tolerate before it complained. He knew the name and rank and breeding line of every warm body between himself and the girl he had been paid to end. He did not know the human. He had decided the human did not matter. The 2 guards he had already killed lay behind him in a service alcove, propped upright against the wall as if they had sat down to rest, their throats opened so cleanly that the wounds had not yet begun to weep. Vess had done this 1,100 times across 9 systems. The Quiet Count did not advertise, did not boast, did not leave a mark on a wall or a word in a record. It simply delivered. In 400 years, no contract taken by the Count had gone uncompleted, and Vess himself had never once been seen by a target who lived to describe him. He carried that history the way another creature might carry a weapon lightly, without needing to look at it. Above him through the floor, the summit was gathering. Princess Vela Ursanth stood at the high rail of the petitioner's terrace and watched the skybarges come in, and she was bored. She would not have admitted it. Boredom was beneath a daughter of House Santh, especially on the morning her betrothal was meant to end a war that had bled 3 provinces white. But the barges came slowly, ponderous violet hulls sliding up through the cloud sea one after another, each carrying some lord or envoy who would bow too low and speak too long, and she had been standing since the first light with her hands folded in the ceremonial posture until her 6 fingers ached. The wind off the cloud sea was warm and smelled of ozone, and the pale orange blossom the palace grew in its hanging tiers. It was, by every measure her tutors had given her, a perfect day. The sun stood high in a cloudless violet sky. The spire's 10,000 panes threw the light back in sheets. "They are afraid of you," said the human behind her. "The ones on the 3rd barge, they keep counting your guards." Vela did not turn. "Everyone counts my guards. That is what the guards are for." "They're counting them like a man counts stairs in the dark," Roan said. "Not to be impressed, to know where the edges are." She turned then, because there was something flat in his voice she did not like, and looked at the young man the Earth Alliance had given her. Emmett Roan was, by Asari standards, an unfinished thing. He stood a full head shorter than any adult of her own kind, and where the Asari were long and lithe and moved as if the air itself were something to be polite to, the human was compact, blunt, heavy through the shoulders in a way that read to her eye as a kind of birth defect. His skin was a dull, warm brown with no luminance to it at all. He had no crest, no scent glands, no claws, no venom, no chitin, nothing the galaxy recognized as a weapon. His eyes were small and dark and set flat in his face, and his hands, when they were not doing something, hung open and empty at his sides. He was young even for his own short-lived species, barely past the age his people called adulthood. He wore the plain gray of her household staff, and he carried no blade, because the court had not thought it necessary to arm the human, and the human had never asked. She had grown fond of him the way one grows fond of a garden animal. He was quiet. He did not flatter. He remembered how she took her morning draft and he never spilled it. When the court laughed at him, and the court laughed at him often, at his flat face and his soft skin, and the alliance that had thought a creature like this could stand as a princess's protector. He did not seem to hear it, which she had first taken for stupidity, and had slowly revised to something she had no word for. But she did not, for one moment, believe he could protect her. That was not his purpose. His purpose was to exist, a curiosity at her shoulder, a soft living proof that House Santh's reach extended even to the death worlds at the black end of the attrition ledger. The actual protecting was done by the Talon Guard, 40 of them, each a hand taller than Roan and armored in living metal, each bred across 200 generations for exactly this. "You worry too much," she told him. "It is a summit. Everyone is counting everyone." "Yes, Highness," Roan said and stepped back to his place. But she noticed, she would remember later that she had noticed, that when he stepped back he put himself between her and the wide arch that led into the spire, and that his eyes never once went to the barges she found so tedious, but moved instead in a slow, flat circuit of the doors, the servants, the shadows under the hanging tiers, as if the beautiful day were a room he did not trust. Below her feet, one floor down and out of sight, Vess killed the third guard. The politics were simple, as the deadliest things usually are. Vela's betrothal was to be a knot tying House Santh to House Corvith, and the knot, once tied, would strangle the Ninth Conquered, a faction of lesser houses that had grown fat on the border war and would starve the moment peace was signed. The Conquered could not stop the summit by law. They had tried for 2 years and failed. So the Conquered had done what desperate wealthy creatures do. They had gone to the market and bought the one instrument that no law could argue with. Vela did not know this yet. She knew only that her father, the Archon, had tripled the Talon Guard, sealed the lower tiers, and forbidden her to leave the ceremonial floors until the vows were spoken. She knew that Guard Captain Threll had not slept in 2 days and that his crest had gone the flat gray of a man expecting the worst. She knew that the summit had the wrong weight to it, a heaviness under all the blossom and the light, and that she had learned to ignore, because to acknowledge it would be to acknowledge fear, and a princess of House Santh did not fear. The human felt it too. She could tell because he had stopped talking, and Roan only stopped talking when something in a room had his full attention. "Captain Threll," Vela said, as the guard captain climbed the terrace steps toward her, his armor whispering, "You look as if the sky is falling." "The sky is orderly, Highness." Threll's voice was gravel. He was old for a soldier, scarred down one side of his long jaw, and he had guarded her since she was small enough to ride on his shoulder. "It's what's under it that concerns me. We've lost contact with 2 sentries on the 9th tier." "Lost contact?" "Their reeds have gone quiet, likely a fault. The spire's old and the summit is straining every system we have." He said it flatly, the way a man says a thing he does not believe in order to measure the room's reaction. Vela saw Roan, at the edge of her vision, go very still. "But you don't think it's a fault," the human said. Threll looked at the human the way most of the court looked at the human, as one looks at a chair that has spoken. "No," he said, surprising her, "I don't. But I have 40 of the finest killers in the province standing between the princess and the 9th tier, so what I think does not much matter." "How many did you have yesterday?" Roan asked. 40. "And you're sure it's still 40? The captain's crest shifted. It was the smallest thing, a flicker of color, but Vela had spent her whole life reading crests, and she saw the doubt move through him like a current. "The sentries on the 9th. "Aren't answering," Roan finished, "so it might be 38. He said it without heat, without drama, a man doing arithmetic aloud. "You should stop counting the guards you started with. Start counting the ones that answer when you call." For a long moment the captain and the human looked at each other, the old soldier and the soft young thing from the death world, and something passed between them that Vela could not read, a recognition in a language she did not speak. Then Threll turned to his lieutenant and gave 3 low orders, and the tenor of the Talon Guard around the terrace changed, subtly, the way a still pond changes when something moves in its depths. Vela laughed, because the alternative was to feel the cold thing crawling up her spine. "You'll frighten the envoys," she told them both. "It is a fault in an old reed. We are the best guarded house in the province on the best guarded day of the year." Nothing walks into the Ceridian spire uninvited. Neither of them answered her, which she found, for the first time that morning, genuinely frightening. 2 tiers down, Vess reached the sealed junction that Captain Threll believed no one could pass, and considered it with the patience of an artist. The junction was a marvel, a membrane of living metal, keyed to the blood scent of the Talon Guard, guarded on the far side by a pressure array that would sing the moment anything heavier than a blossom crossed it. Behind that, 3 more guards. It was, the Asari believed, impassable. Vess had disabled 7 such junctions in his career, and the belief that they were impassable was, he had found, the most useful part of their design. A guard who believes the door behind him cannot open, does not watch the door behind him. He did not force the membrane. Forcing was noise. Instead he opened, with a tool grown from his own carapace, the maintenance seam the palace's builders had left in the floor 2 spans to the left, and he poured himself through the crawl space beneath the pressure array the way water finds the low place in a stone. It took him a quarter of an hour. He did not resent the time. The contract specified only that the girl die before the vows were spoken, and the vows were not until the sun touched the western spires, and Vess had killed princesses with less margin and more guards. He emerged in a garden tier, a hanging terrace of orange blossom drunk on the noon sun, and he paused among the flowers to still himself and take the measure of the killing ground above. 40 guards. He had already made it 37. He would make it fewer. Between the guards and the girl there was the old captain who was competent and the household staff who were not, and one other, the alliance creature, the human. Vess had a memory, in the cold storage where the quiet count kept such things, of the dossier on the human species. It was thin. The death worlds at the black end of the ledger were poorly surveyed, because the survey teams did not, as a rule, return, and the galaxy had long ago decided that whatever grew on such worlds was not worth the cost of confirming. The humans had come into the wider galaxy only recently, a soft-skinned, short-lived, clawless people, technologically middling, of no military account. The Earth Alliance's habit of gifting a protector to allied courts was known to Vess as a quaint diplomatic affectation, the way a lesser house might send a rare bird. He had reviewed the human's presence beside the girl, and he had priced it at nothing. He had, in this, made exactly the same judgment that the Asari court had made, that Princess Vela herself had made, that 1,100 targets and 400 years of unbroken success told him was correct. He began to climb toward the girl. Above, the summit had moved indoors, into the Hall of Concord, and Vela stood on the dais in a gown the color of the deep cloud, and let her handmaidens arrange the 10,000 tiny mirrors of her train, while the great and the ruined of the province filed in beneath her. House Corvith entered first, her betrothed among them, a young lord with a fine crest and nervous hands whom she had met twice and would spend her life beside. Then the neutral houses. Then, last and stiff with resentment, the lords of the Ninth Concord, who had lost and knew it, and had come to watch the knot tied because to stay away would be to confess. She watched their faces as they bowed. She had been trained to watch faces. And she saw, on the face of Lord Emissary Caruth of the Concord, a heavy old reptile-blooded noble whose house had made 3 fortunes on the border war, something that did not match the room. The other Concord lords wore defeat. Caruth wore patience. He bowed to her and rose, and his eyes went not to her face but past her, to the guards at her shoulders, and he counted them slowly, the way one counts stairs in the dark. Roan had said that, this morning on the terrace, they count them to know where the edges are. Vela's mouth went dry. She looked for the human and found him where he always was, half a step behind her right shoulder in the plain gray, his empty hands open at his sides. He was not looking at the lords. He was looking at a serving alcove at the side of the hall, where a member of the household staff had just come through with a tray of the pale ceremonial wine. And there was, in the flat dark of his eyes, an attention so total and so cold that Vela felt it as a drop in temperature. "Roan," she said, very quietly under the noise of the hall. "Don't move, Highness," he said just as quietly. "Don't change your face. You're doing well. Keep receiving the bows." A pause. "The servant with the wine, do you know him?" She did not turn her head. She let her eyes go slow to the alcove. The servant was young, an understeward in the ash-colored livery of the household, moving toward the dais with the tray held at the correct height, the correct distance. Everything about him was correct. She had seen 100 servants exactly like him. "No," she breathed, "but he wears the Vree's right, his hands are wrong." Roan had not moved. His voice had not risen. He might have been remarking on the weather. "A house servant carries a tray from underneath with the wrists loose because he's done it 10,000 times and the tray is nothing to him. That man's carrying it like it might bite, and he's keeping his right hand free." A breath. "Highness, when I take your arm, you're going to laugh and you're going to walk with me toward your father and you're not going to look back. Do you understand?" Roaned. "Do you understand?" "Yes," she said, and hated how small it came out. The human took her arm. He did it gently, and he leaned in as if to murmur some pleasantry. And Vela, who had been trained since birth in the art of the composed face, laughed a light court laugh and let herself be turned. And in the same motion, the young understeward with the wrong hands set the tray down on the edge of a pillar shelf and drew, from beneath the ceremonial wine, a shard of black glass the length of a forearm, and lunged for the place where the princess had been standing. He was fast. Vela, turning, caught it only as a smear of motion, the ash livery and the black shard and a face gone suddenly wild with purpose. The Talon Guard, 40 of the finest killers in the province, were a half-second behind. She would learn later that half a second was the whole of the distance between a guard and a corpse. Captain Threll was already shouting. The hall was already coming apart into screaming. And the human let go of her arm and stepped, once, into the path of the black glass. She did not see exactly what he did. That was the thing she would carry for the rest of her long life, that she had been looking directly at him and she had not seen it. There was the lunging steward, and there was the shard aimed at the soft, unguarded space below her ribs, and then there was Roan where the shard was going to be, and a sound like a branch breaking, wet. And the steward was on the floor with his arm bent in a direction. Arms did not bend, and the black shard skittering away across the mirror-bright stone, and Roan was standing over him with his empty open hands no longer quite so empty, and his face had not changed at all. It had not changed at all. That was the worst of it. He looked exactly as he had looked pouring her morning draught. Then the Talon Guard arrived, and the hall was full of armor and shouting, and the would-be killer was buried under a mountain of the province's finest, and Captain Threll had Vela by both shoulders, checking her for wounds with hands that shook, and the summit dissolved into chaos. But Vela was not looking at the captain, or at the killer, or at her weeping handmaidens. She was looking at her human, who had stepped back to his place, half a pace behind her right shoulder, and folded his empty hands and gone still. And she was thinking that a moment ago she would have sworn on the bones of her house that Emmett Roan of the Earth Alliance could not have protected her from a strong wind. 2 tiers below, in the garden drunk on noon, Vess of the Quiet Count went very still among the orange blossoms. He had felt it. Not seen he was too far, too careful, still working his patient way upward. But the Quiet Count trained its instruments to read a killing ground through the walls, through the floors, through the fine tremors of violent death sent up through the living stone of a place, and Vess had felt the steward die. Not die, the steward still breathed. Vess had felt the steward stopped, which was worse, because a death was a variable he could price, and a thing that stopped a killer without killing him was not. The steward had not been his. Vess wanted that understood in the cold private ledger of his own competence. The steward had been the Concord's own clumsy hedge, a knife they had bought cheap and slipped into the household in case the expensive instrument failed. An insult, really. Vess had intended to let the amateur try and fail, to let the guards spend their alarm on him, and then to walk through the exhausted aftermath and do the work properly. That had been the plan. The plan had a flaw. The flaw was that the amateur had not reached the girl, and had not been stopped by the 40 guards, and had not been stopped by the old captain. He had been stopped by the one variable Vess had priced at nothing. Vess crouched in the blossom in the beautiful poured light, and did something he had not done in a very long time. He reconsidered. They took the princess to the Archon's inner sanctum, a fortified drum of a room at the spire's core, where the light came down through a single great oculus, and the walls were 3 spans of living metal, and there her father raged. The Archon Santh was a tall old lord gone silver at the crest, and Vela had never in her life seen him lose the cold composure that was his house's pride, and he lost it now. He had the captured killer's confession before the man's arm had been set. It was, as Roan had guessed, a conquered blade, a cheap one, a fanatic from a ruined border family, sent not to succeed, but to make the household spend its vigilance. The Archon understood the insult of it as quickly as Vess had. Someone had spent a cheap knife to blunt the guard, which meant someone was holding an expensive one in reserve. "You will not leave this room," the Archon told his daughter. "Not for the vows, not for anything. We move the ceremony here behind 3 seals, and we hold until the Corvith fleet arrives at dusk to witness. Threll." "Highness," said the captain, "we've found the 9th-tier sentries." Something in his voice made the whole room turn. Vela saw Roan at the wall lift his head. "Say it," the Archon said. "Dead both, and 2 more on the service stair we thought were at their posts." Threll's crest was the flat gray of a man reporting his own failure. No alarm, no struggle. "The wounds are—" He stopped. He was a soldier of 40 years, and he stopped. "I've seen every kind of killing this province makes, Highness. I have not seen this kind. They were opened like a seam. Whoever did it stood close enough to touch them, and they never raised a hand." The sanctum went quiet. Even the Archon's rage guttered out, because rage is a thing you feel toward an enemy you can see, and this was not that. "The conquered's cheap knife failed at the front door," Roan said from the wall, and every Asari in the room startled to hear the human speak in the Archon's presence. "So the real one's still coming. He's been coming the whole time. The steward was Noise. He wanted you to spend the alarm." The Archon looked at the human, as if noticing a piece of furniture had opinions. And what would a gift creature from a death world know of the trade of killing? Roan did not answer that. Vela watched him decide not to answer it, watched the decision move flat and cold behind his small dark eyes, and she thought, he knows something and he is choosing not to say it, and she did not know whether that frightened her more or less than the 4 opened guards. "Father," she said, "this morning on the terrace he told Captain Threll to stop counting the guards he started with, to count the ones that answered." She heard her own voice from a distance. He knew, before Threll knew, he knew about the 9th tier. The Archon's silver crest shifted through 3 colors she could not name. He looked at Roan a long moment. Then he said, to Threll, not to the human, "Does the Alliance creature stay armed?" "He isn't armed," Threll said. "The court didn't think." "I know what the court thought." The Archon's eyes had not left Roan. "Ask it. Ask the creature if it wants a blade." Roan met the old lord's stare across the fortified room, and Vela saw the corner of his flat mouth move, not quite a smile, a thing with no warmth in it at all. "No, Highness," the human said. "A blade I'd have to draw, thank you." No one in the sanctum understood that answer. Vela did not understand it. But she saw Captain Threll, old Threll, who had killed more creatures than any soldier in the province. She saw the captain go still and pale, as if the human had said something in a language only the 2 of them spoke, and she filed it away with the branch-breaking sound and the 4 opened guards, in the growing cold place at the base of her spine, where she kept the things about her human that did not fit. The sanctum could not hold the whole apparatus of a summit, so they compromised, as the powerful always do, on a smaller stage that felt like safety. They moved the ceremony up one tier to the Rosewater Court, a bright wide gallery walled in glass on three sides where the noon light came flooding in off the cloud sea, and there was nowhere, the engineers swore, for anything to hide. 20 of the surviving Talon guards sealed the two approaches. The oculus overhead was capped. The glass walls, they explained to the shaking envoys, were living metal in a transparent phase, harder than any blade in the sector. The princess would speak her vows here in the light, surrounded, with the whole province watching through the relay eyes, and let the expensive knife try to reach her through 20 of the finest killers alive. Vela stood at the center of it and understood, with the clarity that comes to intelligent creatures in the moment before disaster, that she had been placed in the safest room in the province, and that she had never in her life been in more danger. Because everyone in the room was looking outward, at the approaches, at the sealed doors, at the impossible glass. And the 4 guards on the 9th tier had been killed by something that stood close enough to touch them. Roan was not looking outward. Roan, alone among all the warriors in the Rosewater Court, had put his back to a glass wall so that no part of the room was behind him, and he was watching the room itself, the guards, the envoys, the servants, the fittings, the floor. Watching it the way a man watches a pond he knows has something in it. "You keep looking at your own soldiers," Vela murmured to him under the ceremony's opening drone. Her betrothed's house was reciting the long genealogies. There was time. At Threll's men. As if one of them might not be one of them, Roan said. "Yes. They are the Talon Guard. They are bred to this, 200 generations." "I'm sure they are, that's the problem." He said it mildly, watching the guards. "Highness, may I tell you a thing about the trade your father asked me about? The one I said I didn't know." "You lied to my father." "I declined to educate him." A pause. "The best killers in the galaxy don't get past 20 of the finest guards alive. That's true. It can't be done, so they don't do it." His flat dark eyes moved along the line of armored Talon guard one by one. "They become one of the 20. They stand in the line. They wait to be trusted, because trust is the only door in a room like this that opens from the inside. Then, when everyone's looking at the sealed approach, the guard beside you turns his head." Vela looked at the 20 warriors sworn to die for her, and for the first time in her life she saw them not as a wall but as 20 separate faces, and she could not have said, if her life depended on it, and it did, which of them she truly knew. "How do you know this?" she whispered. Roan was quiet for a moment. The genealogies droned on. The light poured in off the cloud sea, warm and gold and utterly indifferent. "Because that's how I do it," he said. The vows were meant to take the length of an afternoon. They did not last the first hour. It began, as Roan had warned, from the inside, but not the way even he had guessed, and Vela would remember that too, that her human had been wrong about the shape of it and right about the fact of it, and that being right about the fact had been enough. One of the Talon guard at the western seal simply folded. No cry, no blow, no visible cause. The armored warrior swayed, and the guard beside him reached to steady him, and the second guard folded too, and by the time the third had begun to sag, the whole line understood that something was moving through them that they could not see, and the Rosewater Court erupted. Vela saw it come apart in fragments, Threll's voice roaring seal orders. The envoys stampeding for the eastern approach, which was the wrong approach, which was exactly where the panic wanted them. Her betrothed's guards closing around their own lord and abandoning her, because blood runs to blood in the end. Her father shouting her name. The relay eyes drinking it all and pouring it out to the whole watching province. The collapse of House Sant's great peace, live, in the flooding noon light. And a fine mist in the air near the western seal, catching the sun, beautiful, drifting toward her on the gallery's slow circulation. A contact toxin, aerosolized, keyed to Asari blood. She understood it a half-breath before it reached her, understood that the folding guards had been breathing it, that in 4 more breaths she would fold too, that the expensive knife had not needed to reach her at all, had only needed to reach her air. Then Roan's hand closed over the lower half of her face, his bare human palm warm and dry and blunt, and she could not breathe at all, and he was walking her backward, fast, low, his other arm a bar across her shoulders, out of the drifting light and into the lee of a stone pillar where the air was still clean, and his mouth was at the side of her head saying, flat, unhurried, small breaths, "Through my hand. It's on your skin now, but it needs a dose. You're under it." Small breaths. She could not have said how he knew the toxin, how he knew the dose, how he knew that the lee of a pillar in a circulating gallery would hold clean air for 90 seconds. She could not have said any of it. She breathed small breaths through the seams of a deathworlder's fingers and watched over his sheltering arm as the Rosewater Court, the safest room in the province, filled with beautiful drifting death and screaming, and she understood that every creature in that room had been looking the wrong way, and that the only one who had been looking the right way was the one they had all priced at nothing. Across the gallery, at the western seal, one of the fallen Talon Guard rose. He rose smoothly, unaffected, because he had never breathed the toxin, because he had released it from a reservoir grown into the underside of his own armor, and had feigned his fall to sell the panic. He was, in every visible particular, a warrior of the Talon Guard, bred and scarred and sworn, and he had stood in the line for 200 days waiting to be trusted, and he had been trusted, and now he turned his head. It was not Vess. Vela would learn this later, and it would chill her more than anything else that day. It was not even a member of the Quiet Count. It was a second instrument entirely. The Conquered had bought 2 expensive knives, not one, and slipped the first into the guard line months ago as living insurance. And this was the flaw in Roan's reasoning that had not mattered, because Roan had been wrong about which guard and right that it would be a guard. The false warrior drew, from a slit in his armored forearm, a filament blade that hummed as it woke, and he came across the poisoned gallery through the drifting mist that could not touch him, straight for the princess and the human sheltering her, and he was very, very fast. Roan let go of Vela's face. "Hold your breath," he said, "and don't watch this part," and he stepped out from the pillar's lee to meet the false guard in the open, in the drifting toxin, in the flooding noon light, unarmed. Vela watched. Of course she watched. She had been told not to, and she was a daughter of House Santh, and she watched every moment of it, and it lasted less time than it takes to describe. The false guard was armored in living metal and taller than the human by a head, and armed with a filament blade that could part stone, and he came in fast and clean and certain, a killing stroke aimed to take Roan across the throat and open him and be done. Vela had seen the Talon Guard drill. She knew what that stroke was. There was no answer to it. A body could not move faster than a filament blade. Roan did not try to move faster than the blade. He moved before the blade, into it, inside its arc, so that the humming filament passed behind his shoulder through the space where a fleeing creature's throat would have been, and the false guard's armored arm came down not on a target but across the human's braced back, and Roan was already under the guard's center, already lifting. He had gotten a hand into the seam of the armor at the wrist, the one gap 200 generations of breeding had not managed to close, and he did something to it, brief and total, and the humming blade fell out of a hand that had stopped taking orders. Then the human took the false guard's helmeted head in both of his blunt, clawless hands and brought it down as he brought his own knee up, and there was that sound again, the wet branch breaking, and the finest living metal in the province was suddenly a heavy thing, folding toward the floor with nothing behind its eyes. It was over. The false guard was down, and not stopped this time but ended, and Roan stood over him breathing hard in the drifting toxin, and Vela realized that the human had spent his own held breath on the fight and was now breathing the poisoned air, and that he had known he would, and had stepped out anyway. "Roan," she was up, coming for him, and he put out one flat palm without looking, the gesture he used to stop a servant spilling a tray. "Clean air by the pillar, stay in it." His voice had changed for the first time all day, not with fear, but with the labor of a body that had just been asked for everything. "Threll, the seals." He said it louder, across the coming-apart room, and old Captain Threll, who had frozen for one instant at the sight of a soft death-world creature killing his finest guard with 2 hands and a knee, unfroze and began to roar the gallery back into order. They got the toxin cleared. The gallery's circulation was reversed. The Western seals' poisoned air vented into the bright sky. The fallen guards, the real ones, who had only breathed a stunning dose meant to sell the collapse, dragged into clean air where the household physicians could work. The false guard was left where he lay, and no one would go near him, and the relays that had been drinking the disaster were seized and blinded. But not before the whole province had seen a princess's gift creature step unarmed into a killing toxin and break the unbreakable in the time it took to gasp. Vela sat in the clean air by the pillar with her human beside her, and he was gray under the brown of his skin, and his blunt hands had begun, very slightly, to shake the toxin, working through the small dose he had taken. A physician came and hovered, uncertain, having no idea what a human's blood did or did not tolerate, and Roan waved her off. "It's keyed to your people," he said to Vela, his voice rough. "A sorry blood, my blood's the wrong shape for it. I'll be sick for a day." "That's all." He closed his eyes. "That's the only reason I could go into it. If it had been keyed to me, I'd have stayed by the pillar and let him come to us, and it would have been uglier. Wanted you to know I'm not reckless." A breath. "I read the room, that's all it ever is, reading the room." She looked at him, gray and shaking and diminished by a poison that would have folded her in 4 breaths, and had cost him only a bad day, and she said the thing that had been rising in her since the branch-breaking sound in the Hall of Concord. "What are you?" He opened his eyes. In the flooding noon light they were very dark and very tired and entirely calm. "Your father asked the wrong question this morning," Roan said. "He asked if the creature wanted a blade. The question is why the Alliance sends a person instead of a blade." He let his head rest back against the stone. "A blade only cuts what you point it at. My people learned a long time ago that you can't point a blade at what you can't see coming. So we stopped sending blades. We send someone who's spent his whole life on a world that's trying to kill him, and we let him watch the room." A pause. "That's all Earth is, Highness. A room that's been trying to kill us since before we could stand up. We're just what learned to watch it." Vela did not answer. She was thinking about the attrition ledger, the great registry the survey houses kept, where every world in the surveyed galaxy was ranked by how hard it fought the things that tried to live on it. She had studied it as a girl. She remembered the low tiers, the garden worlds, the gentle places. She remembered that the scale ran from 1 to 40, 40 being the worst survey team the houses had ever been willing to fund. And she remembered now, with the cold thing fully awake at the base of her spine, a detail her tutor had mentioned once and moved past quickly, the way one moves past an obscenity, that there were a handful of worlds the survey houses had logged and then struck from the ledger entirely. Not ranked 40. Unranked. Removed. Because the teams sent to rank them had not come back to file the number, and after the 3rd such team, the houses had decided that a world which ate its assessors did not need a number. It needed a warning. "Your world," she said slowly. "It isn't on the ledger." "No," Roan said, eyes closed almost gently. "It used to be. They took it off." 2 tiers below and 1 tier over, in a dead sentry's alcove where the light came up through the floor, Vess of the Quiet Count crouched over the body of the false guard's twin, the reserve instrument, the Concord's second insurance, the one who had been meant to stand in the eastern line and finish the girl if the western one failed. Vess had killed him. He had killed him quietly, professionally, without heat, because the reserve instrument had panicked when the plan went wrong in the Rosewater court, and a panicking amateur near Vess's contract was a variable, and Vess did not permit variables he could remove. He crouched now in the poured light and thought about the one he could not remove. The quiet count trained its instruments to keep a private ledger, and Vess opened his and looked at it clearly. The Conquered had bought 3 knives for this contract, 2 cheap and 1 dear. The dear one was Vess. The 2 cheap ones, the front door fanatic and the guard line insurance, had both been spent, and both had died on the same obstacle. Not the 40 Talon guard, not the old captain, not the 3 seals or the impossible glass. On the soft, clawless alliance creature that every dossier in the sector, including Vess's own, had priced at nothing. Twice now, the creature had priced at nothing, and twice it had returned the whole value of the contract. Vess was 400 years into a career that had never once failed, and he had reached that record not by being the fastest instrument the Count had ever grown, he was not, but by being the one who reconsidered. 1,100 times he had looked at a killing ground and found the one variable everyone else had discounted, and 1,100 times he had priced it correctly and removed it first. The skill was not the killing. Any instrument could kill. The skill was the seeing. He had failed to see the human. He admitted it now in the cold, private place without shame, because shame was another variable and Vess did not keep it. He had made the galaxy's judgment about the death worlds, and he had made it lazily, and the laziness had cost the Conquered 2 knives, and had nearly cost Vess something he valued more than the fee, which was the record. The record was 400 years long, and it had his name on the end of it, and he did not intend to be the instrument who broke it against a clawless, soft-skinned pet from a world too dangerous to rank. So Vess did the thing that had kept him alive for 4 centuries. He stopped thinking about the girl. He began, instead, to think about the human. He would need to see it work, he decided. He could not price what he had not watched. The dossier was useless, a thin nothing about a middling people from an unsurveyed world, and the 2 spent knives had told him only that the human broke armored killers with its bare hands, which he could see for himself and which did not tell him how. He needed to watch the creature move against a real threat once from close and understand the mechanism, so that he could build the killing ground that removed it. Every instrument had a mechanism. Every mechanism had a seam. Vess had never met the thing he could not open, given the patience to watch it work. He had until dusk. The Corvith fleet arrived at dusk to witness the vows, and once the fleet's guns were overhead, the contract became impossible even for Vess, and the Conquered's fee became forfeit, and the record acquired its first blemish. So he had the long, bright afternoon, and a palace still reeling, and a household that had just learned to fear the wrong thing, to fear the toxin, the seals, the guard line, while continuing, out of 4 centuries of galactic habit, to price the human at nothing. Vess intended to spend the afternoon watching the human work. Then, when he understood it, he intended to remove it. And then, with the only variable that mattered finally priced and gone, he intended to walk into whatever room they had hidden the girl in and complete the contract. Quietly, the way the quiet count had completed 1,100 contracts before it, so that 400 years later no one would remember the name of the soft creature that had almost, for one bright afternoon, cost him the record. He rose from the dead insurance knife and folded himself back into the light, and began, patiently, to hunt the hunter. Above, they moved the princess again. They took her deeper this time, down to the spire's storm core, a squat armored chamber below the waterline of the cloud sea, where the light came only from cold panels, and the walls were thick enough to shrug off a fleet's bombardment. The Archon meant it as the end of the argument. Nothing living could reach the storm core without passing 4 sealed locks and the whole surviving weight of the Talon guard, and the girl would sit inside it, sealed, until the Corvith fleet's guns hung over the spire at dusk, and the vows could be spoken by relay from behind 3 spans of metal. Vela hated it. She said so once and then stopped, because she saw what the fear was doing to her father, and she was still, under everything, his daughter. But she sat in the cold armored room and felt the walls press in, and understood that they had done it again, that they had built her the safest box in the province, and that a box is only as safe as the guards on its door, and the last box's guards had included a killer who stood in the line for 200 days waiting to be trusted. She said this to Roan. He had come down with her because the Archon had, in the space of one afternoon, stopped questioning whether the human should be at his daughter's shoulder. Threll had seen to that. Whatever passed between the old captain and the young Deathworlder in the language only they spoke, it had ended with Threll telling the Archon, flatly, in front of the whole surviving command, that if the Lord wanted his daughter to live, he would keep the Alliance creature within arm's reach of her and stop asking it to educate him. The Archon had not liked it. He had done it. "They've sealed me in with the guards again," Vela said. "And you told me this morning that the guards are the door that opens from the inside." "I did." Roan had taken his place, not at her shoulder now, but across the small room back to the wall, facing the single lock, where he could see the whole box and everyone in it at once. There were 4 Talon guard inside with them, and he had positioned himself so that all 4 were in front of him. "But this box only has 4. I can watch 4. And if one of them, then I'll only have to watch 3. He said it without any change of tone, and one of the 4 guards, a young one, made a low sound in his throat, and Roan looked at him, mild and flat, until the sound stopped. "I'm not accusing anyone, soldier. I'm counting. It's the only thing that's kept her alive today, so we'll keep doing it." The young guard's crest went a color Vela knew well. The color of a proud creature realizing it is in the presence of something it does not understand and cannot dominate. She had worn that color herself that morning and had not had a name for it. She had a name for it now. It was the color of the whole galaxy learning, one creature at a time, what a deathworld grew. Time passed in the cold box. The lock stayed sealed. Through the relay the household reported the palace secured, the toxin vented, the last of the panicking envoys gathered and calmed, the Corvith fleet 3 hours out. It began slowly to feel almost like safety, and Vela watched her human refuse to feel it. Roan did not relax. Roan grew, if anything, more still, more watchful, and after a while she understood that the very calm of the report was what he did not trust. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. "You've gone quiet again." "2 knives," Roan said. He was watching the lock. "The Conquered bought 2 knives that I could see. The Fanatic and the False Guard. Both spent, both cheap." A pause. "You don't send 2 cheap knives at a princess and stop there. Cheap knives are what you spend to learn where the walls are. Somewhere in this palace there's the one they saved the real money for, and he's watched 2 amateurs die on the same obstacle, and he's not going to make the mistake they made." "The obstacle," Vela said. "You mean you." "I mean me." Roan's flat dark eyes did not leave the lock. "The first 2 price me at nothing the way everyone does. This one won't. He's watched. He knows I'm the thing in the room that has to go first." Something moved across his young face, and for the first time all day Vela saw it clearly and could name it, and it was not fear. It was recognition, the same thing that had passed between him and Threll but turned outward now, toward an enemy he had not yet seen. "He's a professional. He'll want to understand me before he tries me. Which means, right now, somewhere in this palace, he's trying to make me show him how I work." He was right. 2 locks up, in a service duct where the cold panels did not reach, Vess was already spending the price of that understanding. Vess had chosen the instrument for its expendability. It was a maintenance drone of the palace's own household, a low, 6-legged servitor thing, mindless, that crawled the ducts scrubbing the living metal, and Vess had taken it and reworked it in a quarter of an hour with the patience of a creature who had 400 years and needed only 1. He had grown a blade into its scrubbing arm and a reservoir of the Asari toxin into its belly and a single crude instruction into what passed for its mind. Reach the girl's room and go for the girl. Not to succeed. Vess did not expect it to succeed. He expected it to die, and he expected the human to be the thing that killed it, and he intended to be watching through the servitor's own dull eyes when it happened, so that at last he could see the mechanism work. He sent it down through the ducts toward the storm core, and he settled into the dark of the service duct with the servitor's feed threading into his mind, and he waited to be educated. In the cold box, the first Vela knew of it was Roan going utterly still, stiller than still, the stillness of a predator that has heard something under the wind. "Highness," he said very softly, not looking at her. "Behind the second guard, the wall vent, something's in the duct." The 4 Talon guard came alive, blades out, and 2 of them turned toward the vent, and Roan said, sharp and flat, the first hard note he had struck all day. "No, don't crowd it, that's what it wants. Back off the vent. All of you back to the girl." And such was the authority in it now, the authority the whole day had built, guard by guard, sound by wet branch-breaking sound, that the 4 bred killers of the Talon Guard obeyed a clawless death-world creature without a blade, and fell back, and put their armored bodies between the vent and the princess, and left Roan alone in the open middle of the room facing the wall. The vent cover came away without a sound. Vess had seen to the hinges, and the servitor came through it low and fast, a scuttling dull thing with a blade where a scrubbing arm should be and a belly full of keyed death, and it did not go for the guards or for Roan. It went, exactly as Vess had instructed it, straight past the human for the princess behind him, because Vess wanted to see what the human did when the threat tried to go around him. What the human did was not go around with it. Roan did not chase the servitor toward the princess. He knew he could not win a race against 6 legs to a target 8 paces away. Vela saw him know it, in the flat half-instant before he moved. Instead he stepped not toward the girl, but toward the place the servitor had to pass, the narrow lane between 2 fixed stanchions where anything crossing the room was funneled, and he was there when it came through, and he did not try to stop the blade arm or the 6 legs. He put his heel down on the thing's back as it passed under him, all his blunt heavy weight through one point, into the seam where the servitor's belly reservoir met its spine, and he did not crush it. He opened it precisely, so that the keyed toxin flooded not the room but the servitor's own works, and the crude little killer's legs locked and its blade arm stopped halfway to the princess's gown, close enough that she felt the wind of it. Close enough that the humming edge kissed the outermost mirror of her train and parted it, and then it was a dead machine leaking its own poison on the cold floor, 4 paces short. Silence in the box, the 4 guards staring, Vela with her hand at her throat and the severed mirror of her train winking on the floor. And Roan, standing over the dead servitor, looking not at it but at the black lens of its dull eye which was still, faintly, alive. "He's watching," Roan said quietly to no one to the lens. "Aren't you?" He crouched slow and looked into the little dead eye that carried Vess's attention up 2 locks and into the dark, and his own face was as flat and calm as it had been all day, and he said, in a voice with no more heat in it than a man reading a list, "You wanted to see how it works. Now you have. It works like this every time. You should keep that in mind while you decide whether the fee is worth it." Then he put his heel down on the lens and the feed went dark, and 2 locks up, in the cold of the service duct, Vess of the quiet count sat in the sudden blindness he had bought and paid for, and understood that he had been seen. Not the servitor. Him. The human had looked up the dead machine's feed and spoken to him, Vess, by name he did not need to know, and had told him the one thing 400 years of contracts had never once told him, which was that the target's guard understood exactly what was hunting it and was not afraid. Vess had watched the mechanism as he had intended, and the mechanism had watched him back. For a long while Vess did not move, which for Vess was itself a kind of violence, a stillness so complete that the maintenance ducts forgot he was in them. He was recalculating, and the recalculation was not comfortable. He understood the human now. Not fully, no dossier, no watching, would ever give him the full shape of a thing grown on an unranked world, but enough. The human's mechanism was not speed, though it was fast. It was not strength, though it was strong. It was that the human had already priced every threat in the room before the threat moved, and had chosen its own ground, and had made the enemy's plan happen where the human wanted it to happen instead of where the enemy wanted it. 3 times now the Conquered's knives had come at the girl, and 3 times the human had not defended the girl at all. It had defended a place, a doorway, a lane, a funnel, and let the knife bring itself to the place and die there. It fought the way water fought, by being where the enemy had to go. You did not beat water in a channel it had chosen. You beat water by choosing the channel. Vess had been trying to reach the girl through ground the human controlled, the household's rooms, the household's ducts, the household's sealed boxes, every span of it read and priced and owned by the creature at the girl's shoulder before Vess ever arrived. That was the error. As long as the fight happened on the human's ground, the human would keep choosing the lane, and the knives would keep dying in it, and eventually one of them would be Vess. So Vess would take the ground. He rose in the dark, and he went not up toward the storm core but down and out, toward the great systems that held the Ceridian spire in the sky, and he began, with 4 centuries of patience and a killer's understanding of how complicated things fail, to build himself a channel. In the cold box the afternoon stretched. Vela watched her human come down slowly, from the pitch of readiness the servitor had brought him to. He never came all the way down. But the edge softened by degrees, into something a shade more like the quiet creature who had poured her morning draught 1,000 mornings, and she found she wanted badly to reach him in that softer register before the day took him back. Emmett, she said. She had never once used the given name. It felt strange in her mouth, small and blunt like everything about him. Sit. You have been standing since first light. Whatever is coming, it is not coming through that lock in the next hour, and you are no use to me folded on the floor. He considered it, she watched him consider it, weigh the lock and the vents and the 4 guards and the cost of his own body, and then he did a thing he had never done in her presence. He sat. He lowered himself to the cold floor with his back to the wall, still facing the lock, and let some of the weight out of his shoulders, and she saw for the first time all day how young he truly was under the flat calm, how few of his short years he had lived, and how many of those few years had already been spent learning to watch a room. "How old are you?" she asked, "in your people's count?" 24. She did not know precisely how that mapped onto an Asari life, her own centuries against his handful of decades, but she knew enough to feel it as a wound. That is very young. It's about middle for a soldier of the corps. He said it without self-pity, a fact off a list. We start young. The world starts on us younger than that. Tell me about it, she said. Your world. Not the ledger, not the survey. I have read all that. Tell me what it is like to be a child there. Roan was quiet a moment. Then he told her in the flat, low voice, and it was the most she had ever heard him say and the least like anything she had imagined. He told her about a world with weather that killed, ordinary weather, the sky itself turning on the things beneath it 3 seasons out of 4. He told her about water that carried death and water that gave life, and how they looked exactly the same, and a child learned the difference or did not grow. He told her about the other things that shared the world, none of them large, most of them smaller than her hand, and how the small ones were the ones that emptied the graveyards. The biting things, the crawling things, the invisible things in the blood and the breath. An entire hidden war fought at a scale below sight, every hour of every day, that his people had been born into, and had never once in all their history been allowed to stop fighting. He told her that the survey houses had raided the world by its predators and its poisons and its weather and had run out of numbers, and had missed the actual reason the world could not be ranked, which was not any single thing that killed you, but the sheer unresting quantity of things that killed you. The way the whole world at every scale, and in every medium was, patiently and without malice, always and forever trying to take you back. And you don't die, Vela said. Your people, you just keep not dying. Most of us die. Roan's voice did not change. That's the part the galaxy gets wrong. They think a death world makes you hard to kill. It doesn't. It kills almost all of us, all the time, the way it always has. He looked at her across the cold box, and his small dark eyes were very steady. What it makes is the ones it doesn't kill yet. It makes creatures that have spent every single day of their lives inside a thing that is trying to kill them, and have learned to stop noticing that it is, so that we can still eat and sleep, and pour a princess's draft and fall in love, and raise children into the same war, while a part of us that never turns off keeps watching the room. That's all it is, Highness. We're not hard to kill. We're just never surprised. Vela thought about the branch-breaking sound, and the 4 opened guards, and the heel coming down on the servitor's spine, and the flat calm on his young face through every second of it, the same calm as pouring the draft, and she understood at last why it had frightened her more than any snarl could have. It had frightened her because it was not an exception. It was not rage, or valor, or the terrible thing a gentle creature becomes when pushed. It was Tuesday. It was a man doing, in her defense, the thing his whole life had already trained into the part of him that never turned off, no more remarkable to him than breathing the poison air of his childhood. "You are not helpless," she said. It came out as almost an apology. "I thought the whole court thought." "I know what the court thought. No heat in it. It's useful mostly. A thing everyone prices at nothing gets to watch the room from the middle of it." He almost smiled, the warmthless thing. "The one who's hunting us now is the first one all day who stopped pricing me at nothing. That's the only thing about today that actually worries me." The lock chimed. Both of them came off the wall, Roan on his feet before Vela had finished flinching, the 4 guards wheeling, but it was only the relay, the Archon's face resolving in the cold panel light, and Vela's relief curdled the instant she saw his crest. It was gray, not the tired gray of the long day, the dead flat gray of catastrophe. "The Corvith fleet has turned back," the Archon said. "They received a recall order under my seal, ordering them to hold at the province edge against a threat to their own worlds. The order is a forgery. By the time their flag captain confirms it false and turns them around again, it will be dusk and past. We have no witnesses coming. We have no guns coming." His silver crest flickered. "And that is not the whole of it. The Spire's lift array is failing. 3 of the 8 sky anchors have gone dark in the last quarter hour. Engineering says it is cascade, a fault in the old systems. The summit's strain, they are wrong. Someone is walking down the spine of my palace putting out its heart 1 anchor at a time, and when the 4th goes, the storm core floods, and everything below the waterline, he did not finish. He did not have to." Vela felt the cold thing at the base of her spine open its full length. She looked at Roan. Roan was already looking at the vent, and the lock, and the cold walls of the safest box in the province, with a new expression. The first she had seen on him all day that she would have called, on any other creature, dread. "He's not coming to us," Roan said quietly. "He's moving the room. He's going to flood us out of the box and take us up through ground he spent the afternoon rigging, and somewhere on the way up he's going to make a channel where I don't get to choose the lane." He turned to her and the dread was gone, folded back under the flat calm, but she had seen it, and she would not forget that she had seen it. "Highness, whatever happens on the way up, however it looks, you keep moving toward the light. Up, toward the top of the spire, the open tiers where the fleet would have to see us if it were here. He wants us in the dark of the low systems, so we go up. No matter what you see behind you, you go up. Say it." "Emmett, say it." "I go up," Vela said, "no matter what I see behind me." The 4th anchor went dark, and far below in the roots of the spire the cloud sea began, slowly and without malice, to come in. They opened the box. Roan went first through the lock, not because protocol allowed it, but because he had told the 4 guards flatly that he would go first or he would not go at all. And the guards, who had watched him work all afternoon, had stopped arguing with the Deathworlder about doors. He put his head into the corridor beyond, and Vela watched him read it, the whole length of it, in one flat sweep, the failing light, the wet metal, the places a thing could wait, and then he brought her through, the 4 guards folding around her, and they began to climb. The spire fought them, and Vess fought them through the spire. The first anchor lift they came to was dead, its shaft a black throat with the cloud sea whispering somewhere far below, and Roan turned them from it without slowing, and the guard who had wanted to argue for it, the young one whose crest had gone the color of humbling that morning, took 1 step toward the lift to check it, and the floor at its lip gave way under him, cut through beforehand, waiting, and he was gone into the dark with barely a sound. Roan did not stop. "That's what the dead lift is for," he said, low, moving them past. "He gives you the obvious way and cuts the floor in front of it. Anything that looks like the way up is the way he wants you. We take the ways that look wrong." So they took the ways that looked wrong, maintenance stairs slick with condensate. A cargo duct they went through folded double. A gallery of the hanging gardens gone strange in the emergency light, the orange blossom black now, the noon sun replaced by the cold red of the failing systems, and here Vess took the second guard. A whisper of movement in the black flowers, a wet sound, and the guard simply was not there anymore. And Roan spun them all toward the threat with his empty hands up and found nothing, the killer already gone, having spent 1 life to teach them that the gardens were his. "Don't chase it," Roan breathed, herding them out up toward the light. "He wants us to stop and hunt him in his ground. We don't stop, up." 2 guards left. Vela's fine gown was torn and soaked, and her 6 fingers bled where she had caught herself on a cut edge. And she did not slow, because a Deathworlder was pulling her up through a drowning palace by the arm and telling her, in the flat calm voice, that stopping was how you died, and she believed him now the way she believed in gravity. Captain Threll found them on the 9th tier. He came down out of the brightening upper levels with 6 of the surviving Talon guard behind him, and for 1 moment the corridor was almost an army again, and Vela's heart lifted, and she saw Roan's did not. The human looked at the 8 guards now around the princess, and Vela watched him do the arithmetic he had done all day, count the ones that answered, and she watched the arithmetic fail to comfort him, because 8 guards was 8 more doors that could open from the inside, and they were climbing into ground the enemy had spent an afternoon preparing. "The upper tiers are secure," Threll reported, breathing hard. "The observation crown, the sun galleries, we hold them. If we get the princess to the crown, we can hold her there until the fleet turns back. It's the highest point in the spire, glass on every side, midday sun, no cover for a span in any direction. Nothing crosses that floor without every eye in the province on it." "That's where he wants her," Roan said. Threll stopped. The 8 guards stopped. "The crown is the most defensible. The crown is the most visible. He doesn't need cover. He spent the whole day showing us he doesn't need cover. He needs us to go where he's already been." Roan's flat eyes moved over the 6 new guards, one by one, the old sick arithmetic. "But you're right that we can't stay in the roots. The water's coming. So we go up, because up is the only way left, and he knows it, and he's rigged the top of this palace the way he rigged the bottom. We're not walking to safety, Captain. There's no safety left in this building. We're walking to the ground he chose. The only thing we get to decide is how we arrive." Threll looked at the young Deathworlder a long moment, in the cold red light, water rising somewhere below them. "Then tell me how we arrive," the old captain said. "You've been right all day and I've been wrong, and I am too old to let pride kill the child I carried on my shoulder. Tell me, and it's done." And Vela saw, in that moment, the last of the galaxy's certainty go out of the oldest soldier she knew, and pass to the youngest, and she understood that she was watching something the survey houses had never once put on the ledger. Not a Deathworld strength, but the thing a Deathworld strength did to everyone who finally saw it. The way it did not conquer them but relieved them. The way 40 years of a warrior's pride could set itself down, grateful, before a clawless creature of 24. Because at last there was someone in the room who was never surprised. "Take the guards away from you," Roan said. "One at a time or all at once, but he'll do it because as long as you're a wall he can't reach her, so we don't be a wall. Captain, you take your 8 and you go up the grand ascent loud with a body and a princess's train in the middle of you, and you make him think she's there, and she won't be. He turned to Vela. You and I go up the dead ways, the wrong ways, just us. No guards for him to turn, no wall for him to break, no crowd for him to hide in. Just the two of us on the ground he chose, arriving the way he doesn't expect, small and quiet, and already knowing he's there. You take the princess up alone, Threll said, against the finest killer the market can sell. With no guard at all. The guard is the door that opens from the inside. Roan's voice did not change. I'll take my chances with the doors I don't have. Threll looked at Vela. She was the Archon's daughter. It was hers to refuse. She thought about the young guard gone into the black shaft, and the second guard gone into the black flowers, and the false guard who had stood in the line for 200 days, and she thought about a clawless creature of 24 who had been right, flatly and without pride, about every single thing since first light. Do as he says, Princess Vela told the captain of her house. All of it, and Threll, her voice caught once and she mastered it. Live if you can. That is an order. Highness, said the old soldier, and put his fist to his scarred jaw in the salute of the Talon Guard, and gave it. Vela saw it clearly, not to her, but past her to the human. Then he took his 8 and a handmaiden robed in a princess's torn train and went up the grand ascent, loud, into the bright, to sell the lie with his life if the price came due. And Roan took Vela up the dead ways. They climbed in silence now, because talking was a thing the enemy could hear, and Vela learned in that climb what the human had meant about being never surprised. He read the drowning palace like a page in a book he had already lived. Here a corridor that looked clear and was not, he felt it, some wrongness in the air and turned them back. Here a service hatch that looked cut off and dead, and he opened it and it was clean, because the enemy had priced it as useless and left it alone. Twice she heard, far off in the failing building, the sounds of Threll's diversion, a clash, a shout, the deep note of the Talon Guard engaging something in the bright upper halls, and twice she started toward it, and twice Roan's blunt hand closed on her wrist and turned her, gently, up, toward the light, no matter what she heard behind her. Once the climb almost ended. They came to a junction where 3 ways met, a wide, bright one that climbed toward the upper halls, and 2 narrow, dark ones that did not, and Roan stopped them dead at the mouth of it, one hand out, his whole body gone to the stillness that meant a threat had entered his reading of the room. Vela saw nothing. She saw a junction full of the cold red emergency light, the 3 ways, the wet metal. But Roan stood at the mouth of it and did not move, and she had learned by then that when the human did not move it was because moving was how you died. He's here, Roan breathed, not close, but he's been through this junction and he's left it dressed, all 3 ways. His flat eyes moved over the bright climbing corridor. That one wants us worst. It's the obvious way up and it's lit, and it's clear, and every part of me that's tired wants to take it, and that's exactly why he cut it. Same as the dead lift at the bottom. He gives you the way your exhaustion wants. Then we take a dark one, Vela whispered. He knows I'll think that. So he dressed the dark ones too, one worse than the other, and left them both looking equally bad, so that when I refuse the bright way I'll have to guess between them, and a guess is a coin, and he's happy to let a coin decide whether I walk you into a cut floor. Roan crouched slow at the junction's mouth, and Vela watched him do the thing she had watched him do all day, the thing the survey houses would never put on any ledger. He read the ground the enemy had made patiently without fear from the middle of it. But a coin's only a coin if both sides are the same, and he's a professional, so he's not sloppy, so the 2 dark ways aren't the same. One of them he actually finished. The other he only made look finished, because he ran short of time or short of patience, and he's betting I can't tell the dressing from the real thing in the dark, with the water coming and a princess on my arm. Can you? Vela breathed. Roan was quiet a moment. Then he pointed to the left-hand dark way at a place low on the wall where the condensate ran down the metal. Water's beating wrong there, he said. Something's under the panel that shouldn't be, warming it so the drops break instead of running. He grew a charge into the wall and it's live. He shifted his hand to the right-hand way. This one the water runs clean all the way down. He wanted it to look as bad as the other. He couldn't make the water lie. He rose. We take the right, behind me. Step where I step and nowhere else. And if I stop, you stop, even if the water's at your knees. They took the right and it was clean, and the water was at their knees by the time it let them out 2 tiers higher. And behind them, muffled and enormous, they heard the left-hand way take the charge the human had read in a broken bead of condensate. A dull, sea-swallowed crump as the enemy's dressing went off into the flooding dark, into the space where a guess would have walked them. Vela did not look back. She had stopped looking back hours ago. She climbed where the Deathworlder stepped and nowhere else, toward the light, and understood, with the cold water rising at her legs and the palace dying around her, that she was being carried up through the inside of a thing designed to kill her by the one creature in the province who had spent his whole life inside things designed to kill him, and had gotten so used to it that he could read a killer's intent in the way a drop of water chose to fall. They came out at last, not into the observation crown where Threll's diversion was drawing the enemy's eye, but 1 tier below it, into a wide daylit maintenance gallery along the spire's sunward face, where the great glass of the outer hull rose in a sheer transparent wall, and the noon light, real light, the true sun, blinding after the red-lit roots, came pouring in across a broad flat floor of pale stone. The cloud sea lay far below, brilliant white. The sky was the deep, flawless violet of the perfect day it had been since first light, indifferent to everything that had happened under it. And in the middle of the daylit floor, between the princess and the light she had been told to climb toward, unhurried, exactly where the ground had funneled them, a shape unfolded itself from the seam of the glass where the brightness had hidden it, and stood, and turned its narrow chitinous head toward the 2 small figures who had just arrived on the ground it had chosen. Vess of the Quiet Count had been waiting for them, in the light in the open, for some time. Vela had never seen an Ithkai in the flesh. She had seen images. The Quiet Count did not permit them, but the province kept old ones, taken from the few killing grounds where a relay had survived, and the images had not prepared her. The assassin was tall, taller than the Talon Guard, but built like a thing folded rather than grown, all narrow blue-black chitin and long jointed limbs that bent in one joint too many, and it moved, when it moved, with a smoothness that was worse than speed, a total absence of the small corrections a living body makes, as if friction and doubt had both been bred out of it 4 centuries ago. Its head was a narrow wedge with no face she could read, only a cluster of dark lenses that took in the light and gave nothing back. Along the inner edge of each forelimb, folded flat against the chitin, lay blades grown from its own body, pale and thin and humming faintly, waking. The soft one, it said. Its voice came from somewhere in its throat, dry and precise, in flawless trade speech. I have watched you work 3 times today. I have not watched anything so carefully in 400 years. A pause, and the dark lenses turned briefly to Vela and dismissed her, and returned to the human, and Vela understood that she had just been priced at nothing by the deadliest creature in the sector, and that it was, obscurely, an insult. You understand what I am. You're the one who reconsiders, Roan said. He had put himself between Vela and the assassin in the flooding light, his empty hands open at his sides, and his voice was exactly as flat as it had been pouring her draft that morning. I've met a few of you, not your guild, your kind. The ones who get old in this trade get old by being the only one in the room who checks his own certainty. That's rare. It's why you're 400 years, and I'm 1 afternoon. You flatter me. I'm pricing you. Roan's dark eyes did not leave the assassin. You should know I'm doing it out loud so you understand this isn't going the way your afternoon of watching told you it would. The lenses regarded him. You believe you can beat me. No, Roan said. I've watched you too. You're faster than me. You're armored where I'm not. You've got venom I can't match and reach I can't close easily and 400 years I can't argue with. On open ground you chose, with no lane for me to make you die in, straight across, you win. I priced it. That's the honest number. A beat. So I'm not going to fight you straight across. I'm going to do the other thing. What other thing? I'm going to let you spend your certainty, Roan said, until you don't have any left. You've never fought anything you couldn't price. I'm the one thing on your ledger with no number. That's going to cost you more than you think, and I've got nothing to spend but time, and behind me there's a princess who's going up those stairs into the light whether we're finished or not. He did not look back at Vela. Highness, go, up the wall stair to the crown. Now, don't watch this part. Vela did not go. She would think about that in the long years after that he had told her twice in one day not to watch, and both times she had watched, and that the watching was the only reason the province would ever know what a death world truly grew, because the relay eyes were dead and the guards were gone and there was no witness left in all the drowning spire but a princess who did not obey. She backed to the wall stair as ordered. She put one bleeding hand on the rail, and she watched. Vess moved. There was no signal, no gather, no tell. The smoothness simply became speed, and the assassin crossed the daylit floor in the time it took Vela's heart to close once, blades waking to a scream, and struck at the human with a stroke that would have taken the head from a Talon guard before the guard knew the fight had started. Vela did not see Roan move. She saw only that the stroke passed through the place where he had been, and that he was somewhere fractionally else, inside the reach, too close for the long blades to open, and that his blunt hand had found the assassin's bladed forelimb at the joint and turned with it rather than against it, riding the enormous force past his own body the way she had seen a reed bend a storm wind past its root. Then Vess's second forelimb came around, the one Roan had not caught, and opened a line across the human's shoulder, and the pale blade came away wet, and Roan was moving back and out, and there was blood, human blood, dark and shockingly red in the noon light, running down his gray sleeve. First price, Vess said, not slowing, circling now the smooth, terrible glide. You are inside my reach and I still cut you. On this ground I have 2 blades and you have none. You cannot ride both. No, Roan agreed. His breath had changed. The blood ran off his fingers and spotted the pale stone. I can't ride both, so I'll give you one. And he did a thing Vela could not understand, and Vess, she would realize later, understood too well and too late. He stopped protecting the wounded shoulder. He let it hang. He offered the assassin the whole left side of his body, open, undefended, and he set his flat dark eyes on the assassin's right forelimb, the blade that had cut him, and waited. Vess had spent 400 years learning to read the ground, and he read the offer, and he knew it for a trap, and he could not price the trap, because to price it he would have had to know what a creature from an unranked world would trade for an opening, and that was the one number the whole galaxy had struck from the ledger. He hung, for a fraction of a heartbeat, on the edge of his own certainty, take the open side, which every instinct 4 centuries deep screamed was the kill, or refuse it, which meant the human had just chosen the lane after all, on open ground with nothing. The quiet count did not get old by refusing the open kill. Vess took it. The right forelimb drove for the human's open side, the pale blade screaming, the whole 4 centuries of the quiet count behind it, and Roan did not defend the open side. He had never meant to. He had given the assassin the target and then removed it, dropping under the stroke as it committed, and the blade meant for his heart went over his back, and in the moment the assassin's forelimb was fully extended past him, fully committed, its many-jointed length locked straight for the killing thrust. Roan took the limb in both his blunt, clawless hands at the 2 joints that mattered, and put his whole weight and his whole braced deathworld body into a direction. The joint was not built to bend. The sound was not the wet branch of the morning. It was sharper, a crack like green wood splitting, and then a second crack, and the assassin's right forelimb, the blade arm, the reach, half of everything that made the open ground Vesses, came apart at 2 joints and hung, the pale blade going dark and silent as the limb that drove it stopped taking orders. Vess made a sound Vela had not known an Ithkai could make. It was not pain, exactly. It was the sound of a certainty coming apart. In 400 years, no target had touched Vess of the Quiet Count, and now a clawless creature of 24 had traded a strip of its own shoulder for the assassin's blade arm and had come out of the trade ahead. And the sound Vess made was the sound of an instrument discovering, at the very top of its career, that there was a number it had never learned to price, and that the number had just cost it half its body. But Vess was 400 years old, and 400 years does not come apart in one stroke. He did not freeze. He did the thing that had kept him alive across 9 systems. He abandoned instantly and without grief the plan that had failed. The blade arm was gone, the open ground kill was gone, the certainty was gone, so Vess stopped trying to kill the human. He drove his remaining forelimb not at Roan at all but past him, low and fast and final, and he raked the pale blade across the outside of the human's leg above the knee, deep, and Vela saw it go in and she saw something worse. A bead of dark fluid at the blade's edge, worked into the wound, deliberate. Not a killing cut, a dosing cut. The venom the human had said he could not match. Then Vess broke off, folding backward across the daylit floor faster than the wounded human could follow, and turned the smooth, terrible glide not toward Roan, but toward the wall stair, toward the princess, toward the contract, because the human was now poisoned and slowing and could not close the distance, and the girl was 8 paces away with a bleeding hand on the rail, and the Quiet Count did not need finesse to end a princess. It needed only to reach her, and the one thing that had kept it from her all day was standing on a leg that had 4 minutes left in it. "Highness," Roan said, his voice had not risen, but it had changed, thickened, the venom already in it. "The stairs, now, up. He can't take both of us and you're the one he's paid for. Go and I'll deal with him." "Go." Vess reached for the princess. And Vela Santh, daughter of House Santh, who had been priced at nothing twice that day by the deadliest creature in the sector, did not go up the stairs. She had watched the human all day. She had learned the one thing he had been teaching without meaning to teach it, that the fight was never about the blade, that it was about the ground, about making the enemy come to the place you had already chosen. She could not fight the assassin. She had no claws, no venom, no 4 centuries, no death world in her blood. But she had 2 things Vess had priced at nothing. She knew this palace, every span of it, better than a killer who had studied it for 40 days, and she was not in that moment afraid. So when the assassin came for her, Vela did not run from it. She stepped toward the wall stair, yes, but not up. She stepped onto the first riser and put her back to the great glass of the outer hull, into the full blinding pour of the noon sun, so that the assassin driving at her had to come out of the shadow of the gallery pillars and into the direct light, into the one span of floor where the sun off the cloud sea struck the polished pale stone, and threw it back up, blinding, the way it had blinded her when she first climbed into this gallery. For half a heartbeat the assassin's dark lenses, grown 4 centuries deep for the dim ducts and the shadowed kill, met the full white glare of a death world's ordinary noon. Half a heartbeat, the assassin did not stop, it barely slowed. But it flinched the smallest correction, the first correction Vela had seen its bread-perfect body make, and half a heartbeat on open ground was the whole of the distance between a killer and a corpse. Roan had told her that this morning. He had been talking about the guards. He had been talking, she understood now, about everything. Roan closed the distance the venom had opened. He should not have been able to. His leg was failing under the dose, and his shoulder was open to the bone, and there was a killer's poison working up toward his heart, and Vela saw all of it, saw his body being taken apart from the inside even as it moved, and it moved anyway, because a Deathworlder was not hard to kill. He had told her that too. A Deathworlder was only never surprised, and Roan had not been surprised by the venom or the leg or the failing or the dying. He had priced all of it. He had known, when he traded his shoulder for the blade arm, exactly what it would cost him, and he had made the trade because the number came out with the princess alive on the far side of it. He reached the assassin in the blinding light, in the half-heartbeat the sun had bought, and he did not reach for its throat or its lenses or any place a soft creature would think to strike. He reached, with both his blunt, clawless hands, for the wedge of chitin at the base of the narrow skull, where the head met the folded body. The one seemed 400 years of the quiet count had never once needed to armor because nothing had ever gotten close enough to find it. He got both hands into the seam. And then Emmett Roan of the Earth Alliance, 24 years old, poisoned and bleeding out in the noon light of a world not his own, did the thing his whole life on a world that never stopped trying to kill him had trained into the part of him that never turned off. He closed his hands. There was no branch crack this time. There was a long, low sound, structural, the sound of something that had been built to last 4 centuries reaching the one load it had never been designed to bear. And then the sound stopped, and the assassin stopped, and the smooth, terrible glide went out of the long, folded limbs all at once, the way a held tension goes out of a cut cable, and vests of the quiet count, 400 years, 1,100 contracts, never seen, never failed, came down onto the pale stone in the flooding light, a loose and finished thing, and did not move again. Roan let it down. He did not throw it or stamp on it or stand over it. He simply let it down, the way he set a tray down, and stepped back off it, and stood swaying in the noon sun with his hands hanging open and red at his sides, and his young face as flat and calm as it had been at first light. "That's the number," he said to no one, to the dead assassin, to the 400 years. His voice was thick and going. "Everybody prices it at nothing. That's always the number." Then the venom took his leg out from under him, and the death roller went down onto the bright stone beside the thing he had crushed, and lay still. For one breath Vela stood frozen on the sunlit riser, and every instinct her long, soft life had given her screamed to call for the physicians, the guards, her father, someone larger and older and surer to come and fix this. And then she heard the human's own flat voice in her memory, "Count the ones that answer." And she understood that no one was coming, that the relay eyes were dead, and the guards were gone, and the palace was drowning, and there was no one in all the Ceridian spire to save the creature who had just saved her but a princess with a bleeding hand. She came off the stair. She went to her knees beside him on the stone in the pour of the noon sun, and she made herself look at the wound above his knee, the deep, clean line the assassin's blade had left, and the darkness worked into it, and she made herself think. He had told her about the venom. Not much. He had said only that it was keyed to her people and that his blood was the wrong shape for the toxin in the gallery. But this was a different poison, a dosing cut, the Ithkai's own, and she did not know its shape or his. She knew nothing of human medicine. She had grown fond of him the way one grows fond of a pet, and she did not know the first thing about keeping him alive, and the shame of that came up in her like a tide. But she had watched him all day, and watching, it turned out, was a thing that could be learned. He carried something. She had seen it 100 times and priced it at nothing, the way the galaxy priced everything about him, a flat gray case at his belt, the size of 2 fingers that she had assumed was some human affectation, a token of home. She got it open with her bleeding hands. Inside, in shaped recesses, lay a row of small blunt injectors, unlabeled in any script she could read, and she did not know which one, or where, or how much, and Roan was going gray and his breath was going shallow, and there was no time to learn it the slow way. "Emmett," she took his flat face in her 6-fingered hands and turned it toward her. His eyes were half open, unfocused, the venom climbing. "Emmett, which one? You have to tell me which one." For a moment there was nothing behind his eyes, and Vela felt the whole day tilt toward a grief she had no room for. Then the part of him that never turned off, the part a death world had built, that did not stop for venom or dying or anything short of the end, surfaced one last time, and his cracked lips moved. "Third," he breathed, From the left blue band into the wound, all of it, then the red one leg above the cut. A shudder took him. Do it wrong and I die faster, so do it. Like you pour the draught steady, you never spill. She did not spill. She found the third injector, the blue band, and she put it into the open wound the way he said, all of it, steady, her hands as still as they had ever been at the morning ritual. And she felt him convulse once as the countermeasure went into the venom and the two poisons met. Then the red one, into the muscle above the cut, and she pressed it home and held it and counted, the way she had watched him count all day, and somewhere in the counting his shallow breath caught and steadied, and the gray under the brown of his skin stopped deepening. It did not lift. He did not wake. But he stopped dying, held at the edge of it by a princess who had spent the day learning without knowing she was learning, the one deathworld skill that could be taught. Pay attention and do not spill. The floor shuddered under her. Far below, the fifth sky anchor gave way, and the Ceridian spire lurched in the sky, and Vela heard the deep, sick groan of a palace beginning at last to fall. The storm core was long flooded. The water was climbing the roots. In the failing of the great lift array, the whole floating pile of glass and stone was settling, span by span, toward the cloud sea it had ridden above for 1,000 years, and everything below the crown was going down with it. She could not carry him. He was compact and heavy, deathworld dense, half again the weight his size promised, and she was a court creature bred for grace, not labor. But the crown was one tier up, and the wall stair went to it, and there was a service cradle at the stair's head. She knew this palace, every span of it better than any killer. A gravity sled the maintenance crews used to haul stone up the outer face. She got it down. She got the human onto it, an arm's length at a time, talking to him the whole while in the flat, steady voice she had learned from him, saying his blunt, small name, telling him he did not get to price himself at nothing, and then leave her to prove the number wrong alone. And she hauled him up the wall stair, into the observation crown, into the highest and brightest place in the drowning spire, where the glass rose on every side, and the noon sun stood at the top of the flawless violet sky, and the whole white cloud sea lay spread below like the floor of the world. Threll was there. He was down to 3 guards, and he was bleeding from a wound that had taken part of his crest, and the handmaiden in the princess's train lay covered by the far glass, dead. The diversion had cost what Threll had known it might cost, but the old captain was on his feet, and when he saw Vela come up into the crown hauling a deathworlder on a stone sled with her own bleeding hands, Vela watched 40 years of a soldier's certainty finish the change that had begun that morning. He did not ask where the assassin was. He looked at the human on the sled, gray and still and breathing, and at the princess who had hauled him up out of a drowning palace, and he knew. Of course he knew. He had known since the branch-breaking sound in the Hall of Concord. In the language only the two of them spoke. "Is it done?" Threll said. "It's done," Vela said. "He did it. And I kept him alive, and now you are going to help me keep him alive, because the fleet is turning back and this palace is going into the sea, and I am not going to lose him after all of it. Move, Captain." "Highness," said old Threll, and for the second time that day he put his fist to his scarred jaw and gave the salute of the Talon Guard. But this time he gave it to her, to the princess who had learned, in one bright and terrible day, to never be surprised. Then he and his 3 guards moved, and they made a place for the human in the center of the crown, in the flooding light, and they held the highest room in the falling spire, and waited for the sky to decide whether it would send the fleet in time. The sky decided. The Corvith fleet came up out of the cloud sea an hour before dusk, 40 violet hulls breaking the white surface into towers of spray, their flag captain having confirmed the recall order false, and turned his ships back at a speed that had cost him 3 engines. They came in fast and hard and low, and the first thing they did was not to fire or to dock, but to catch, to throw their lift arrays around the falling spire the way a hand closes around a dropped cup, 40 ships straining together to hold 1,000 years of glass and stone above the sea it was trying to join. The whole crown shuddered as the fleet took the palace's weight. The floor stopped falling. And through the great glass on every side, Vela watched the ships of her betrothed's house hang blazing in the last of the noon light, holding her drowning home in the air by main force, and she thought, they came for a wedding, and they arrived at a wake, and they will not know for hours which one it still is. They came into the crown in armor, a Corvette boarding guard, and behind them her betrothed's own flag captain, and behind him, carried up in a lift cradle, ashen, unwilling to be anywhere else, the Archon Sant. Her father crossed the crown to her and took her bleeding hands in his, and for a long moment the cold lord of House Sant could not speak at all. Then he looked past her, at the human on the pallet in the center of the room, gray and still and breathing, and at the 3 surviving guards standing over him like an honor watch, and at old Threll with half his crest gone, and he understood, without being told, most of what had happened in his falling palace while he sat sealed and helpless in a lift cradle. "Where is it?" the Archon said. "Not who, not the killer, the assassin." "The one they sent." "1 tear down," Vela said. "In the Sun Gallery, he crushed it." She heard her own voice, flat and steady, the voice she had learned that day, and she saw her father hear it too, and marked that his daughter had come up out of this a different creature than the one he had sealed in a box that morning. The quiet count, 400 years. He crushed it with his hands, and it dosed him doing it, and I kept him alive. And now you are going to give him your own physicians and your own blood forges and whatever else it takes, and you are not going to argue with me about it. "No," the Archon said quietly, "I am not going to argue with you about it." The conquered came apart within the hour, and it came apart fittingly in the light. They had gathered the surviving houses in the great Sun Gallery of the fleet's own flagship, all the lords and envoys of the summit, plucked from the drowning spire and set down in a bright violet-glassed hall to account for the day. Vela was there, at her father's side in a borrowed gown, her hands bound in clean cloth. Roan was not there. Roan was 2 decks down in a Corvette medical bay with the physicians of 2 houses bent over him and Threll standing guard at the door, because Threll had declared, flatly, that he would not leave the human's door for anything short of the Archon's command, and the Archon had not given it. But Roan was in the room all the same. He was in every face. The whole gallery had seen the relay before the eyes went dark, the soft alliance creature stepping into the toxin, breaking the false guard with 2 hands and a knee. And now they had all heard what waited crushed in the Sun Gallery of the fallen spire, and there was not a lord in the room who could look at the empty place where the human should have stood without a coldness moving through them. Lord Emissary Caruth of the 9th Conquered tried, even then, to hold the line. He was heavy and old and reptile-blooded, and he had made 3 fortunes on the border war, and he stood in the bright hall and denied it all in a voice like grinding stone. The recall order was not his, the assassin was not his. The conquered grieved the day's violence and demanded an inquiry into House Sant's own security, which had so plainly failed. He was good. He had held worse lines than this. And for a few moments the gallery wavered, because the great and the powerful always want to believe that the powerful did not do the thing, and Caruth gave them the story that let them believe it. Then Vela stepped forward, without permission, and spoke. "You counted my guards," she said. Caruth stopped. "Highness. This morning, in the Hall of Concord when you bowed. You did not look at my face. You looked past me at my guards and you counted them slowly." Her voice did not rise. She had learned that from the human too, that the cold, flat voice carried further in a frightened room than any shout. "My protector remarked on it. He said a creature counts guards that way for one reason, to know where the edges are before he tests them. You already knew there were fewer than there should be, my lord, because you had put the missing ones in the ground yourself. You counted my guards because you were checking your own arithmetic." She let that sit in the bright air. "Every other lord in that hall wore defeat. You wore patience. Now tell this gallery what a defeated house has to be patient about, unless it is waiting for something it has already paid for. The hall was silent. Caruth's heavy jaw worked, and Vela saw the moment the room turned, saw the wavering lord stop wanting to believe him, because she had given them a thing they could see, the small cold detail, the tell no innocent creature carries, and once a room has seen the tell it cannot unsee it. "You have no proof," Caruth said, "but a dead alien's opinion and a child's." "I have the assassin," the Archon said. It was the first time he had spoken, and the gallery went stiller still. "The quiet count does not survive its contracts to be questioned," the Archon said, rising, his silver crest catching the light. "That is the whole of its value. In 400 years no house has ever held the body of a count instrument because no house has ever produced a corpse. We have one. It is in a preservation cradle 2 decks below this floor, and whatever its guild grew into it that it would rather we not read, my lord. We have 400 years of curiosity and a very great deal of motivation, and we will read all of it, the contract lattice, the payment sent, the routing. The quiet count keeps its own ledgers inside its instruments. We are going to open yours." He looked at Caruth without heat, the cold flat regard Vela had inherited and refined that day. "You spent 3 knives to end my daughter and collapse a piece. 2 were cheap, and 1 was the most expensive thing the market sells. And all 3 of them died on the one obstacle every lord in this room, including you and including me, priced at nothing." A pause. "You should have counted the human, Caruth. We all should have. We are going to spend a long time learning too." Caruth made one last move, because creatures like Caruth always did. He had come to the flagship's gallery armed. A lord of his rank did not go unarmed, and no one had thought to disarm a defeated envoy at a summit meant to end in vows. And when he saw the room turn against him, when he understood that the assassin's own lattice would hang his house, he did the desperate arithmetic of the cornered, and decided that a dead princess was still worth more to the ruin of House Sant than a live confession was worth to his own survival. He drew, from within his heavy robes, a short discharge blade of his own reptile-blooded people, and he lunged across the bright gallery not at the Archon but at Vela, because Vela was the piece, and if he was going to fall, he meant to take the piece down with him. He was fast for an old lord. He was faster than the young steward in the Hall of Concord had been, faster than anyone in that gallery of startled nobles expected. He was not faster than the thing that had crushed the quiet count. Roan was not in the gallery. Roan was 2 decks below in a medical bay, gray and poisoned and barely alive. But Threll was at the door, Threll, who had guarded Vela since she was small enough to ride on his shoulder, who had watched a Deathworlder work for one long day and had spent that day learning, in the language only the 2 of them spoke, the one lesson the human taught without meaning to. Threll did not lunge to meet Caruth's blade, because he was old and Caruth was fast, and a straight race would have gone to the assassin's knife. He did the other thing. He was already standing where the danger had to pass, at the princess's shoulder, in the place he had held all his life, the place the human had held all that day, and he simply put himself into the lane Caruth had chosen, and let the old lord bring the blade to him, and took it through the meat of his own arm rather than let it reach the child he had carried, and closed his other hand on Caruth's wrist and did not let go. It was not the human's cold precision. Threll was not a Deathworlder. He paid for it. The discharge blade cost him the use of the arm for the rest of his years. But he had learned the shape of the thing, and the shape was enough. And by the time the Corvith boarding guard swarmed the old lord under, Caruth's blade had never come within a span of the princess. And the last knife the 9th Conquered ever drew had died, like all the others, on an obstacle it had priced at nothing. Vela stood untouched in the bright hall and looked at her old captain bleeding for her with the blade still in his arm, and understood that the human had taught the whole province more than how to fear a Deathworlder. He had taught them how to stand in the lane. And she thought that this, too, was a thing the survey houses would never put on any ledger. That the deadliest thing a death world sent into the galaxy was not the crushing of an assassin, but the quiet lesson it left in everyone who watched it work. They read the assassin. It took the physicians and the record clerks of 2 houses 3 days, working in the preservation cradle 2 decks below the flagship's gallery, and what they drew out of the dead instrument's contract lattice was as complete a confession as any court in the province had ever been handed. The quiet count did keep its ledgers inside its instruments, payment sent, routing, the lattice of obligations that bound a contract to its buyer, because in 400 years no instrument had ever come home to be emptied by anyone but the guild, and a killer who is never caught has no reason to hide what only his own guild will ever read. The lattice named the 9th conquered. It named the accounts. It named, in the cold chemical honesty of a thing grown for one purpose, the exact fee the conquered had paid to end a princess and drown a peace, and it named Lord Emissary Caruth's own house as the hand that had signed it. Caruth did not stand trial. Houses of his rank were not tried. They were resolved quietly in the cold procedural way of the Asari, and by the turning of the season the 9th conquered had ceased to exist as a power, its border fortune seized, its lords scattered to lesser holdings, its name struck from the rolls of the great houses. It was, everyone agreed, a very complete resolution. Vela, who watched it done, understood that her father had learned something that day too in the falling of his palace, that the cold, flat finish, the thing done all the way to the end without heat, was not the human's invention. It was only that the human had shown them how thoroughly it could be done. But the resolution of one bought house was the small consequence of that day, the local one. The large consequence took longer to arrive, and it arrived from the one direction no house in the province had thought to watch, from the quiet count itself. The guild that had never failed now had a corpse. For 400 years the quiet count's whole value, the thing that let it charge what no other instrument could charge, had rested on a single unbroken fact. No house had ever held one of its own. No body, no confession, no proof, no failure. The count did not lose. That was not a boast. It was a market position, 4 centuries deep, and House Sant had just ended it publicly with a preservation cradle and a readout lattice in front of every great house in the province. The count could not let that stand unanswered. A guild of killers that has lost its one guarantee has lost everything, and a guild that has lost everything either takes it back or dies. So the count sent an emissary, not a knife. Even the count understood now that a knife sent at House Sant was a knife spent, but a speaker, a high instrument of the guild's own council, who came to the rebuilt court under a flag of parley and asked to see 2 things, the body of the instrument called Ves, and the creature that had crushed it. Vela was in the audience when the emissary came, and she watched the thing that happened, and it was the moment she understood what her human had truly done, not to one assassin, but to the shape of the galaxy's certainty. The emissary looked at the body first. It stood over the preservation cradle a long time, reading the wounds the way Roan read a room, and Vela saw the exact instant it finished the reading, because its narrow head went very still. It had come, she realized, half believing this was a trick, that no soft alliance creature had truly taken a count instrument at the seam of its skull with 2 bare hands, that there was some weapon, some machine, some hidden thing that had done the real work and been dressed up as a human afterward for the province's pride. It read the body and it found no weapon. It found the marks of 2 blunt clawless hands closing on the one seam 4 centuries had left unarmored, and it understood that the thing was exactly what it looked like, and that was worse than any trick, because a trick could be answered and a fact could not. Then the emissary asked to see the creature, and they brought Roan. He came in on his own feet, which he should not yet have been able to do. The physicians had said a week, and it had been 4 days, and he was thinner and grayer, and he leaned lightly. On a cane the Corvus shipwrights had made him. But he came in on his own feet in the plain gray of a princess's household staff, and he crossed the bright court to stand before the high emissary of the guild that had never failed, and he did not bow, and his young face was as flat and calm as it had been pouring a draught. "You are the one," the emissary said. "I'm the one," Roan agreed. 400 years, the emissary said, and 1,100 contracts, and Vess of the Quiet Count was never seen by a living target. Its dry voice did not rise, but Vela, who had spent a day learning to read a killer's stillness, saw what it cost the thing to say. "You have taken from my guild the only thing we sell. I have come to know what you are so that my council can decide what to do about you." Roan looked at the emissary for a while. When he spoke, it was not loud, and it was not a threat, which was what made it the most frightening thing Vela heard in all the long aftermath of that day. "You can decide whatever you want," the human said, "but I'll tell you what you already read on the body so you don't waste a council meeting on it. You sent your best. Not a good instrument, your best, 400 years old, the one that never lost. And he didn't lose to a fleet or a fortress or a better killer. He lost to one soft thing that everybody prices at nothing. On open ground he chose himself in the middle of the afternoon." A pause. "There are a great many of us. We are not rare where I come from. The thing your vest couldn't price, the thing with no number on your ledger, my whole world is full of it, and my world is only one of ours, and every single one of us grew up inside something that tried to kill us every day and got used to it." He let that settle in the bright hall. "So your council can decide to keep taking contracts against my people. That's your right. I'd only tell them to read the body first, and then ask themselves how many more 400-year instruments they have to spend, learning the same number your vest learned, before they decide the number was always nothing." The emissary of the Quiet Count did not answer. It stood a long moment in the flooding light of the rebuilt court, before the clawless creature that had ended 4 centuries of its guild's certainty. Then it did a thing no instrument of the Count had done in living memory. It inclined its narrow head, not a bow. The Count did not bow, but an acknowledgement, the cold professional courtesy of one killer conceding a number to another, and it withdrew. And within the season the word had gone out through the quiet channels the guild used, that the Quiet Count would no longer accept contracts against the Deathworld species at any price for any buyer. Not from mercy. The Count had no mercy. From arithmetic. They had finally priced the human, and the price was too high, and a guild that had gotten old by reconsidering had reconsidered one last time. The survey houses came next, because the survey houses always came, sniffing after any event that touched their ledger. The attrition ledger was the oldest registry in the surveyed galaxy, and it moved with the slowness of a thing that had been right for 10,000 years and did not expect to be corrected. It ranked worlds 1 through 40, 40 being the worst survey the houses had ever been willing to fund, and it had, in its long dry history, struck exactly 7 worlds from its rolls entirely, the unranked ones, the ones whose assessors did not return, the handful of places the registry had decided a number could not describe. Earth was one of the 7. It had been logged provisionally in the first contact surveys, and then it had eaten 3 survey teams, and the houses had struck it and moved on, filing it under the single dry notation the registry used for such worlds. Assessment discontinued. Hazard unquantified. For most of the galaxy, hazard unquantified meant unimportant. A world too far out and too poor and too deadly to be worth the cost of a 4th survey team was a world that could be safely forgotten, and the galaxy had forgotten it, and had gone on treating the soft, short-lived people who came out of it as a diplomatic curiosity, a source of quaint gift creatures for allied courts. What happened in the falling of the Ceridian Spire did not change the number. There was no number to change. What it changed was the meaning of the words. The survey houses, reviewing the day, the toxin, the false guard, the Quiet Count instrument crushed at the seam of its skull by 2 bare hands, did the thing they had not done in 10,000 years and reopened a discontinued assessment. They did not send a team. No house would fund a 4th team to Earth, now less than ever. Instead, they did something colder, and Vela thought when she read of it far more telling. They left the world unranked, exactly as it had been, and they revised the notation. Where the ledger had read hazard unquantified for 400 years, it now read hazard confirmed. Species already deployed. Do not test. Do not test. 3 words, appended to a registry that had not been amended in a lifetime, and they went out to every house and every fleet and every market in the surveyed galaxy, and they meant more than any number on the scale of 40 could have meant. A ranked world was a known quantity, a thing you could price and plan against. An unranked world with do not test beside it was the registry's oldest institution admitting, in writing, that it had met something it declined to measure and advised the galaxy to leave alone. There had never been such a notation before. The 7 struck worlds had always simply been blanks. Now one of them had a warning, and the warning had been written not by a frightened envoy, but by the coldest and slowest and most conservative registry the galaxy owned. And everyone who read it understood exactly what it took to make that registry write do not test. The other 6 struck worlds were noticed, after that, in a way they had not been noticed in 10,000 years. No house sent teams to them either. But the great powers began, quietly, to route their fleets around them, and to strike them from the lists of places a rival might safely be provoked into, and to wonder in the private way of the powerful, who never say such things aloud, what else the galaxy had filed under blank because a number could not describe it, and how many more of the unranked worlds were breeding, patiently and without malice, the kind of thing that had come up out of the falling Ceridian spire with 2 empty hands. The ledger had spent 10,000 years teaching the galaxy that the deadliest worlds were the ones with the highest numbers. It had taken one bright afternoon to teach it the harder lesson, that the worst of them had no number at all. Vela read it in the rebuilt court, months later, and she thought about a soft young creature of 24 who had told her, in a cold, flooding box, that his world was only a room that had been trying to kill his people since before they could stand up, and that his people were only what had learned to watch it. And she thought that the survey houses, in their 10,000-year caution, had finally arrived at the same understanding she had arrived at in a single afternoon, and had needed the crushed body of a 400-year assassin to get there, and had still, in the end, only managed 3 cold words for a thing she had watched pour her morning draft. But that was later. In the first days, while the fleet held the broken spire above the sea, and the physicians of 2 houses argued over a biology none of them had ever treated, Vela did not think about the ledger or the count or the ruin of the conquered. She thought only about whether the human would wake. He woke on the 3rd day. She was there. She had not left. She had made the Corvus Medical Bay her court, received her father and the flag captain and the survey clerks there, in a hard chair beside a pallet, because the princess of House Sant had decided that the center of the province was wherever the human breathed, and no one in the fleet had the standing or the nerve to tell her otherwise. So she was there, in the flat gray light of the medical bay, when Roan's small dark eyes opened and found the ceiling, and then slowly found her. "Highness," he said, his voice was a ruin, "you're supposed to be somewhere safe." "I am somewhere safe," Vela said. "I am beside the most dangerous creature in the sector. My father has decided it is the only address in the province he trusts." Something moved at the corner of the human's mouth, the warmthless thing, but with, for the first time, a little warmth in it after all. "You kept your hand steady," he said. "With the injectors. You didn't spill." "I never spill." She had meant it lightly. It did not come out lightly. It came out with everything the day had put into her, and she watched the young Deathworlder hear all of it, and be, for the first time since first light, at a loss for the flat, cold answer. "Emmett," she said, "when you told me not to watch, both times, why?" He was quiet a while. The medical bay hummed. "Because the galaxy prices us at nothing," he said finally, "and mostly that's useful and mostly I want it kept that way. A thing that gets to be nothing gets to watch the room from the middle of it. The day people stop pricing us at nothing is the day they start pointing the real weapons at us." He looked at her, tired and gray and honest. "I didn't want you to see the number. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and then I'm not the quiet one at your shoulder anymore. I'm the thing the whole court is afraid of. I've watched it happen. It's lonely, Highness. I liked pouring your draft." Vela thought about that, about a creature that had chosen, deliberately, to be underestimated, because being underestimated was the last quiet thing a death world had left it. And she understood that the flat calm she had taken all day for the absence of feeling had been, all along, the presence of a very great deal of it, held still, the way you hold a hand steady over an open wound. "I have seen the number now," she said. "I cannot unsee it. So we will have to find another way for you to be the quiet one at my shoulder, because I am not willing to lose that either." She rose from the hard chair, and she took his ruined hand, the blunt, clawless hand that had ended 400 years, in both of her six-fingered ones, steady, not spilling. "You will not go back to being a gift creature, Emmett Roan. The Alliance gave you to my house as a curiosity, and I will not return you as one. But I find I would still very much like you at my shoulder. As what, we will decide together, when you can stand up without a cane and argue with me properly. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, Highness," the human said, and closed his eyes and slept, and for the first time in a very long time, Vela thought, slept without the part of him that never turned off keeping watch, because for once in a medical bay above a broken palace, there was someone else in the room who had learned to watch it for him. The peace was signed after all. It was signed in the end, for the same reason it had nearly been drowned, because the powerful do the cold arithmetic, and the arithmetic had changed. The border war had been profitable for the conquered because the war could be won or lost, and a thing that can be won or lost is a thing worth spending lives on. But the summit's collapse had shown every house in the province what House Sant now had at its shoulder, and a house with a death worlder was not a thing you went to war with lightly. The Corvith alliance, which had come to the summit as a marriage of convenience between two tired houses, became, in the aftermath, the most sought-after treaty in the sector, because everyone had watched the relay before the eyes went dark, and everyone had heard about the seam of the assassin's skull, and no lord in the province wanted to be on the far side of a border from the house. The quiet count had struck off its own contract rolls. So the vows were spoken. 3 months later, in the rebuilt Rosewater Court, the fleet had held the spire until the shipwrights could grow new anchors, and the palace flew again, as bright and glass and daylit as it ever had, and Vela Ursanth married the young lord of House Corvith with the nervous hands, and it was a fine, cold, political thing, and she went into it with her eyes open, because she was her father's daughter and the peace was worth it, and she had learned that year exactly what the peace had cost and exactly what it was worth. Her betrothed understood, without anyone quite saying it, that the marriage was a treaty and not a romance, and that the princess's true intimates were an old scarred captain and a soft-skinned death-worlder who stood at her shoulder in the plain gray of household staff, and he was wise enough, the young lord, to be grateful for both of them rather than jealous, because a lord who married into House Sant married into its protection, and its protection now had a face the whole galaxy had learned to fear. He was, Vela thought, going to be a perfectly good husband and a perfectly good ally, and she would build a perfectly good life with him, and none of it would ever be the thing that had passed between her and the human in the flooding dark of a drowning palace, when a clawless creature of 24 had traded a strip of his own shoulder for her life, and priced the trade at exactly nothing. Roan stood at the vows healed off the cane. He wore the plain gray. He watched the doors. They redefined him, in the cold procedural way of the Asari, because the Asari could not tolerate a thing that had no proper place in the hierarchy. He was given a title, sworn shield to the House of Sant, an old rank that had not been conferred in 300 years, which carried the right to bear arms in the presence of the Archon, and to stand within the inner seals and to be, in law, no creature's gift. The court, which had laughed at the Alliance creature for a year, did not laugh any more. The court watched him now the way one watches deep water, with respect, and with a careful distance, and with the particular unease of the powerful in the presence of a thing they cannot dominate and can no longer pretend not to see. And Roan, given the rank and the right to bear arms, still carried no blade. Vela asked him about it once in the rebuilt court, when the season had turned and the palace flew bright above the cloud sea and the day was, by every measure, perfect. "You may carry any weapon in the province now," she said. "The Archon himself conferred the right, and still you keep your hands empty. Why?" "Same reason as before," Roan said. He was at her shoulder, watching the wide, bright hall, the old flat calm entirely at home in him. "A blade only cuts what you point it at, and the day I start carrying one is the day everyone in this room stops wondering whether I need it." He almost smiled. "Let them keep wondering. Wondering is the safest thing there is. The moment a room stops wondering what you can do, it starts making plans." The lesson had one more thing to teach, and it taught it the way the niche's lessons are always taught, to someone who had not been there and had not learned and priced the human at nothing. He was a young envoy of a distant house, come to the rebuilt court to negotiate a trade concession, and he had heard the story of the summit the way one hears a story that has traveled far and been improved in the telling, and he had decided, in the way of arrogant young creatures who have not yet met the thing that will teach them otherwise, that it was exaggerated. A soft alliance bet crushing a count instrument with its hands. It was a fable, a thing the province told to frighten its rivals, and this envoy was too clever to be frightened by a fable. So he came into the bright court, and he saw the human standing in the plain gray at the princess's shoulder, and he decided to demonstrate his cleverness. He did it at the reception in front of the assembled houses, and he did it, as such creatures always do, as a joke. He was a tall four-armed thing of a scholarly people, and he took up a heavy ceremonial decanter from the side table, and he remarked to the hall in a carrying voice that he had heard House Sant kept a death-world beast for a doorstop, and he wondered whether the beast's reflexes were as quick as the fables claimed, and he tossed the decanter hard and low and directly at the princess, a cruel little test dressed as a jest, meant to make the human either flinch and prove the fable false or lunge and prove himself a beast. Vela did not move. She had learned in a year at the human's shoulder the one thing the envoy had not, that she did not need to. She simply watched the young fool's face and waited for it to change. The decanter never reached her. Roan had it out of the air a hand's breadth from her cheek. She had not seen him move. She never saw him move, that was the whole of it. And he had it not snatched or slapped aside but caught, cradled. The heavy vessel come to rest in his blunt, clawless hand as gently as if he had set it there himself. Not a drop spilled. And he turned, unhurried, and set the decanter back on the side table exactly where the envoy had lifted it from, and stepped back to his place at the princess's shoulder, and folded his empty hands and went still. He had not looked at the envoy, not once. That was the thing the whole court marked, in the ringing silence after, that the human had answered the test as completely as it could be answered, had caught death out of the air and set it down and not spilled a drop, and had not thought the creature who threw it worth the turning of his head. The envoy stood with all four of his hands empty, and his scholarly face the color of a creature that has, in one instant, revised the price of everything in the room. And Vela Ursanth, who had once made exactly the same revision on exactly the same floor, took a small cold pleasure in watching it. And then, because she was her father's daughter and the province was watching, she was merciful. "He does not point," she told the envoy, in the flat carrying voice she had learned in a flooding box a year before. "That is the thing the fables leave out, and it is the only thing worth remembering. My shield has never once in my presence pointed himself at anyone. He simply stands where the danger has to pass, and lets the danger bring itself to him, and sets it down." She let the hall hear it. "You threw a decanter at a princess of House Sant to test a fable, my lord." You should be very grateful that the fable does not point. Now sit down and let us discuss your trade concession, and do not ever again mistake a thing that declines to look at you for a thing that cannot. The story of the decanter traveled further than the story of the assassin, in the strange way of such things, because a court could tell the decanter story at a reception and watch its guests go quiet, and the galaxy came over the following years to know the day of the falling spire not by the crushing of a 400-year instrument but by a princess's line about a thing that declines to look at you. It became, Vela was told, a proverb in 3 systems. She did not mind. She had learned it from the human, all of it, and she thought he ought to have the credit, and he did not want the credit, so she kept it for the house. What she minded quietly was the fashion that followed. The great houses of the province, having watched House Sant's fortunes rise on the strength of the Death Ruler at its shoulder, did what the powerful always do. They wanted one too. The alliance had gifted human protectors to allied courts for years as a diplomatic affectation, and the courts had taken them as curiosities and set them at the edges of their halls to be laughed at. And now, suddenly, every house in the province was petitioning the Earth Alliance for a sworn shield of its own, at any price, and treating the soft, clawless creatures they already had with a new and careful respect that was half fear and half greed. Vela thought it a good thing, at first, a whole galaxy learning at last to price the human correctly. It was Roan who taught her the cold underside of it, on a bright day above the cloud sea, when she remarked that his people would soon be the most sought-after protectors in the sector. Yes, he said, and did not sound pleased. You don't want that. I want you to think about what it means is all. He was watching the hall, the old flat calm. For a long time the galaxy priced us at nothing, and that was dangerous, because a thing priced at nothing gets sent into places it shouldn't go. Now the galaxy started pricing us high, and that's dangerous too, in a different way. He turned his small dark eyes on her. A weapon everyone wants is a weapon everyone wants to own, or copy. Or when they can't own it or copy it, get rid of before their rival does. My people spent a long time being beneath notice. Being wanted isn't safe for Highness. It's just a different kind of exposed. A pause. The survey houses wrote, "Do not test on our world." That's the best thing anyone ever wrote about us, and most of the galaxy read it as an advertisement. I read it as the only friend we've got. I'd like to keep it a warning and not let it curdle into a shopping list. That's above my rank, though. That's a thing for you and your father and the great houses to get right if you can. I just catch decanters. Vela thought about that for a long time afterward, about a young creature who had crushed the deadliest killer in the sector, and then worried, out loud, that his people's new value might get them killed in slower and larger ways than any assassin could manage. And she understood that she had been given, along with a shield, a kind of counsel that no other house in the province possessed. The counsel of a thing that had spent its whole existence being underestimated, and knew exactly how much safety there had been in it, and mourned it a little now that it was gone. She began quietly to make it her work. Not to hide the human, that was finished. The galaxy had seen the number and there was no unseeing it. But to make House Sant the place that treated its Deathworlders as persons, and not as weapons, on the theory, which was Roan's theory, that a thing treated as a person had somewhere to belong, and a thing treated as a weapon only had somewhere to be pointed. It was slow work, and cold and political, and it suited her, because she had become, in the year since the falling of the spire, a creature who did her work all the way to the end without heat, and there were those in the province who said the princess had learned it from her father, and there were those who knew better. Old Thrall lived. He lost the part of his crest the diversion had taken, and he wore the scar of it openly, and he served another 6 years as guard captain before he stepped down. And in all those years he and the human never once spoke of the day in the language only the two of them shared, because there was no need. When Thrall finally set down his blade, he did a thing that scandalized the court and surprised no one who had been in the falling spire. He asked that his captaincy pass not to a bred warrior of the Talon Guard, but to the sworn shield, the Deathworlder, the soft clawless thing he had once looked at as one looks at a chair that has spoken. The Archon allowed it. And Roan, who did not want the credit and did not want the rank and did not want to stop being the quiet one at the princess's shoulder, took it anyway, because Threll asked him to, and because a debt asked in the right voice was the one thing a Deathworlder's cold arithmetic could never quite price at nothing. So the years turned, and the spire flew bright above the cloud sea, and the peace held, and the princess became, in time, the power behind her aging father's throne, and the soft creature from the unranked world stood at her shoulder in the plain gray. He never gave up, watching the doors, catching what came out of the air, never pointing, and the galaxy learned slowly and unevenly, and at great cost to price the Deathworlds correctly, which is to say, to leave them alone. On the first anniversary of the falling of the spire, before any of that had settled into history, Vela went back to the Sun Gallery. She went alone, which she was never quite allowed to do anymore, except that she went with the human, and the human counted as alone in the sense that mattered, because he was the one thing in the province she never had to be guarded against. The gallery had been rebuilt with the rest of the spire, the great glass regrown on the sunward face, the broad pale floor relaid, and the noon light came pouring in exactly as it had a year before, blinding off the polished stone, the cloud sea brilliant white below, and the sky the deep flawless violet of a perfect day. There was nothing to mark the place. The Asari did not mark such places. But Vela knew the span of floor where the assassin had come down, the way she knew every span of this palace, and she stood on it in the flooding light, and was quiet for a while. "I thought you were helpless," she said at last. Roan stood a little behind her, at her shoulder, watching the doors out of a habit that would never leave him. "I know. For a whole year I had you at my side, and I thought you were a soft thing the Alliance had given me for a curiosity, and I was fond of you the way I was fond of a garden animal, and I would have sworn on the bones of my house that you could not have protected me from a strong wind." She did not turn. The light was in her face, and you let me think it. "You wanted me to think it." "I did. Why did you let me be so foolish about you?" He was quiet a moment. When he answered, it was in the flat, low voice, but there was something under it she had learned over the year to hear. "Because you were kind to the foolish thing you thought I was," he said. "The court laughed at me. You didn't. You learned how I took my morning draft, and you never spilled it, and you spoke to me like I was a person, when everyone else in the province spoke to me like I was a piece of the furnishings, and you did all of it while believing I was helpless. That's rare, Highness. Most creatures are only kind to a thing once they've learned it can hurt them. You were kind to me when you thought I was nothing." A pause. "I've been to a lot of courts. I know exactly how much that's worth, because I know exactly how rare it is. I let you go on thinking I was helpless because the way you treated the helpless thing you thought I was told me everything I needed to know about whether you were worth what I'd have to spend to keep you alive." Vela turned then and looked at him, the small blunt creature in the plain gray, the flat calm face, the empty open hands, 25 now, still young, still carrying a world's worth of watchfulness in a body that had barely begun to live. And she understood the last thing about him that she had not understood, which was that the day in the falling spire had not been the moment he decided she was worth saving. He had decided that long before, in 100 quiet mornings, watching how a princess treated a thing she believed could do nothing for her. The crushing of the assassin had only been the collecting of a debt she had run up without knowing it, span by span, kindness by kindness, across a year of pouring the draft. "You crushed the deadliest killer in the sector," she said, "because I was polite to you." "I crushed him because it was the number," Roan said. "But I stood between you and the black glass in the first place, that morning in the Hall of Concord, before I owed you anything. I stepped into it a half-second early, when I could still have let the guards handle it and kept my nothing intact, because of the year of mornings. The assassin was arithmetic." The choosing to be in the room at all, that was you. He almost smiled, the warmthless thing that had over the year acquired a little warmth. You want to know the truth about Deathworlders, Highness, the thing the survey houses will never put on their ledger. We're not hard to kill, and we're not fearless, and we're not what the fables say. We're just born owing the world our whole attention, every day, and we spend a lifetime learning to give it. And when someone treats us well while thinking we owe them nothing, he stopped. The light poured in. We notice. We're very good at noticing. It's the only thing we're actually better at than anyone else. And we don't forget who was kind to the nothing. Vela stood in the sun gallery a long time after that, on the span of floor where a year before she had watched a clawless creature of 24 trade a strip of his own body for her life, and price the trade at exactly nothing. And she thought about all the ways a galaxy could be wrong about a thing, and about how the survey houses had needed a crushed 400-year assassin, and a rewritten registry, and 10,000 years of caution to arrive at 3 cold words for what she had learned in one bright and terrible afternoon at the shoulder of a person she had believed was helpless. They walked back through the palace together, the princess and her shield, into the bright and ordinary business of the day. There was a trade delegation to receive and a border dispute to settle and her father's failing health to manage. And Vela did all of it with the human half a step behind her right shoulder, in the plain gray, his empty hands open at his sides, watching the doors. That evening, as she took her draft, she watched him pour it, steady, unhurried, not a drop spilled, the same small ritual he had performed 1,000 mornings, while the whole province laughed at the soft thing the Alliance had sent to guard a princess. And she thought that the galaxy had it exactly backwards, as the galaxy so often did. It had spent a year marveling that the helpless thing had turned out to be lethal. It had never once thought to marvel at the harder thing, the truer thing, the thing she had learned on the span of floor in the sun gallery. That the lethal thing had spent a whole year content to be thought helpless, pouring a draft with perfect care, asking for nothing, watching the room, and had only ever set that stillness down for the length of a single afternoon, to collect a debt of kindness no one had known they were owed. He handed her the cup. His hands were steady. They were always steady. "You never spill," she said. "No, Highness," said the young man from the world too dangerous to rank, and took his place at her shoulder and watched the door. "I never do."